Chapter 480. Everyone wanted to live, and Shang Guanwan was no exception. But after experiencing those dark months, she would rather die than go back. Are we going north to look for Brother Lanting? Ever since she agreed to go north with them, Shang Guanwan felt as if a heavy burden had been removed from her shoulders. She felt light and at ease. Yes, Jiang Nongqin nodded and added, the journey will be more dangerous. Lady Wan, you must be mentally prepared. Shang Guanwan had vaguely heard about the situation in the north. She knew that the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group were fighting. But could they be more terrifying than the Zhang residents? Her eyes darkened and she said with determination, don't worry, Sister Nongqin. I'm not afraid. It was better to do this sooner rather than later. The troops were ready to depart in 2 days, which was 3 days earlier than the original plan. Shang Guanwan had been hiding in the troop camp for more than half a year. In the beginning, she was a little timid. Her mental state and emotions were very unstable, and her body was very weak. Later, Jiang Nongqin took her to learn martial arts to strengthen her body. In addition, Shang Guanwan had a certain foundation, so she learned very quickly. Even if he couldn't kill or capture them, at least he had the ability to protect himself. Zhang Zhaoshe was wronged in the Lu mansion. When she went back, she cried and complained to her husband, adding fuel to the fire. She thought that her husband would help her for the sake of her dead son, but he slapped Zhang Zhaoshe in the face instead. Not only that, he even scolded her for being short-sighted and wanted to drag her to the Lu residence to apologize. Zhang Zhaoshe was dumbfounded. Anger rose in her heart, and she cried and scolded her husband. Why should I apologize to an unchaste woman? That Gu Zhen is not a good person. She is fickle. Don't tell me that even you have been seduced by her. She's harboring that little bitch Shang Guanwan. Do you want our son to die with everlasting regret? Zhang Zhaoshe's husband was also confused. He didn't know when his wife had become so unreasonable. He smiled coldly and said word by word. You ask me why? Just because she came from a prestigious family. Just because her husband was the magistrate of Chongzhou. In today's world, if someone wants you dead, you can't live. Do you understand? Look at it the other way round. What do you have? Let's not talk about whether she was harboring her daughter-in-law or not. The key is, do you have any evidence? Where are the witnesses and material evidence? You don't have anything at all, yet you dare to come here and ask for him. What is true? Zhang Zhaoshe still wanted to refute, but her husband said again, you should stop interacting with the second wife of the Shangguan family in the future. Look at how disgusting you are now. You're torturing your daughter-in-law at home, but I'm turning a blind eye. I only hope that you don't go too far. Although Madame Shangguan doesn't love her anymore, she still has the blood of Shangguan in her bones. What right do you have to torture her to death? Zhang Zhaoshe opened her mouth and said awkwardly after a while, I'm her mother-in-law. Her husband chuckled coldly. She has already written the divorce papers and gone through the official channels. What kind of mother-in-law are you? You didn't give birth to her, nor did you raise her. What right do you have to decide her life and death? Just because of those books that you hold in your hands all day long. If you have the time, read the words of the real sages, and stop reading these crooked things. Zhang Zhaoshe's husband said this not because he thought that the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women was bad, but because his mother was also a remarried woman. If he acknowledged the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, wouldn't he be scolding his old mother? Looking at Zhang Zhaoshe's absent-minded expression, he curled his lips and left. Zhang Zhaoshe suddenly broke down, with an expression that looked like she was about to cry. Her husband was determined to make her apologize to Gu Zhen. If she did not agree, her life in the residence would be difficult in the future. The legitimate son she gave birth to was sickly and naturally castrated, but the sons of her husband and other concubines were smart and healthy. Because of this, her husband felt that it was all Zhang Zhaoshe's fault that the legitimate son was handicapped. Ever since the legitimate son was born, he rarely entered her room. Her belly had never moved, but the sons and daughters of the concubines jumped out one after another. In the morning of the 2nd day of the new year, the troops were ready to leave. Before leaving, Lady Gu Zhen invited Shang Guanwan to watch a good show. Shang Guanwan looked at the plain and completely unfamiliar woman in the mirror in disbelief. She deeply felt the magic of Lady Guzhen's hands. My sister taught her. It's a good skill, the second lady said in a flat tone. I wonder what kind of show you want me to watch, madam? Sheng Guanwan asked. The second lady said, You'll know in a while. Wait behind the screen and just watch the show. Not long after, the gatekeeper reported that Zhang Zhaoshi had come. Sheng Guanwan subconsciously tensed up and clenched her fists tightly. Lady Zhang, what a rare guest. Why are you here? The second lady's voice passed through the screen and reached Sheng Guanwan's ears. She said sarcastically, I don't have the young madam of the Zhang residence here. Do you want to bring people to search me today? After a while, Sheng Guanwan heard the familiar voice of her former mother-in-law. Her usual sarcasm was replaced by flattery. She was humble and submissive. It was impossible to imagine how powerful and arrogant she was in the Zhang residence. Now, Sheng Guanwan secretly bit her lower lip. She felt inexplicably carefree when she heard Zhang Zhaoshi flattering and apologizing to the second lady, and calling her Madame Lu so intimately. The second lady's reaction was indifferent. She only responded impatiently after the other party said more than 10 sentences. Even though she was so neglectful, the other party still carefully flattered her. After hearing a lot of flattery, the second lady finally showed mercy and sent Zhang Zhaoshi away. The other party felt as if she had been pardoned. When the people of the Zhang residence had completely left, Sheng Guanwan quietly walked out of the screen. The second lady said, Did you hear what was said just now clearly? Sheng Guanwan nodded. Yes. The second lady took a sip of tea. The bright red rouge on her lips was still gorgeous. She opened her mouth slightly. In terms of prestige and status, the Lu residence is not much higher than the Zhang residence in Hajian. But you saw how she was just now. Why do you think that old woman is so submissive and flatters me everywhere? Sheng Guanwan thought for a while. Because of Uncle Lu. Not because of my brother-in-law, but because of the troops in my brother-in-law's hands. The second lady said with a smile, we hit it off at first sight. I feel very sorry for what you've been through, so I'm here to say a few words. If you hold military power one day, those people will also flatter you shamelessly. Only when you're strong can you not be bullied by others. All external forces are unreliable. Now, you can only rely on yourself. Sheng Guanwan was the daughter of the Shengguan family's legal wife. No one dared to provoke her in the past. She had the highest status among the noble ladies in Hajian. Because she was doted on by the Shengguan family, everyone was afraid of the power behind her. But when Sheng Guanwan lost the love of her family, she was violated and treated so harshly that she was almost forced to commit suicide. The second lady made it clear, and Sheng Guanwan was a sensible person, so she understood what she meant. Chapter 481. Sheng Guanwan was hesitant, and her face showed that she was struggling. The second lady said, although you despise those evil books, you still acknowledge them after all. Sheng Guanwan's expression froze and she quickly denied. How is that possible? How could she agree with those books that were full of fallacious theories? The second lady asked her. If that's the case, why do you doubt that you can't do it? Sheng Guanwan was dumbfounded and speechless. After a while, her hesitant eyes became firm, and she bowed to the second lady. Thank you for your advice, madam. The second lady continued. The Shengguan family has your stepmother, so you can't get their protection. The Lu residents can't always protect you. If you want to get rid of Zhang completely, you can only rely on yourself in the future. Do your best and remember to take care of yourself. Sheng Guanwan's eyes reddened, and she gritted her teeth and nodded. Thank you, madam. She had also thought that if her mother hadn't suddenly died of illness, she wouldn't have ended up like this. At least, she wouldn't have been tortured like this. But on second thought, what was the point of resenting these things? There were no ifs in this world, and reality was reality. Instead of thinking about the past, it was better to think about one's future. The second lady watched Sheng Guanwan leave, and secretly shook her head. If it was the old Sheng Guanwan, she wouldn't have needed to point these things out. However, after being tortured by her stepmother in the Zhang mansion, her pride had been broken in just a short 1 or 2 years. The 4 self-accomplishment classics for women that Sheng Guanwan despised had also subtly poisoned her. Now, she hoped that this child could be reborn and have another exciting life. Thinking of this, the second lady smiled gently, like a delicate flower in the water. You really like to meddle in other people's business. Madam, whose lazy voice came from behind. The second lady said calmly, I just see my own shadow in this little girl. She had her sister to protect her, but Shangguan had nothing, so she couldn't help but soften. Rather than saying that she was helping Shangguan, it was better to say that she was helping her own shadow. Zhang Zhaoshu left the Lu residence unwillingly and resentfully. She heard that a troop of the Lu residents was about to leave Hejian County. She tensed up, and a trace of malice flashed across her face. After a while she said fiercely, Go after them. Her intuition told her that Shangguan must be among these troops. That little bitch wanted to fish in troubled waters and escape from Hejian County. Seeing that they were about to leave the territory of Hejian County, Shangguan was in high spirits, but the dense sound of hooves could be heard behind her. Don't be afraid. Jiang Nongqin's expression was still calm. She comforted Shangguan in a low voice. I'll deal with them. The 100 or so people who were chasing after them were the servants of the Zhang residence. Behind them was a speeding carriage. The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Zhang Zhaoshu was sitting inside with a gloomy face. Hand over the little bitch, Shangguan. Zhang Zhaoshu didn't care about the troops at all, because they were just servants, and didn't even have the right to talk to her. Jiang Nongqin scoffed. She raised her hand and said in a hoarse voice, Get into formation and face the enemy. As soon as he finished speaking, the troops, who were originally carrying heavy loads and hurrying on their way, formed a defensive formation as fast as they could. Hundreds of longbows were drawn and arrows were aimed at the people of the Zhang residence. Seeing this, Zhang Zhaoshu's face was so gloomy that ink seemed to drip out. Jiang Nongqin could be considered as half a disciple of Jiang Pingji. She would fight whenever there was a disagreement. If she could fight, she would never talk nonsense. Zhang Zhaoshu, who was weak in combat, could at most rely on the servants around her to act like a tyrant. Jiang Nongqin was not afraid of fighting with her fists. She asked Zhang Zhaoshu in a hoarse voice, Mrs. Zhang, is the person you're looking for here? Cold sweat broke out on Zhang Zhaoshu's forehead. She secretly held the crossbar of the carriage door tightly. Even if she felt that a group of servants would not dare to hurt her, the suffocating murderous intent still scared her. Facing hundreds of arrows that were pointed straight at her head, she felt that if her answer was not satisfactory, she might turn into a hornet's nest in the next second. She almost stopped breathing. She was afraid that the servants in front of her would harm her. In his heart he was secretly angry. These servants of the Lu residence actually dared to be so arrogant. Mrs. Zhang, is the person you're looking for here? Jiang Nongqin asked again with a calm expression. After a while, Zhang Zhaoshu swallowed her anger and said with a twisted face, No, I was wrong. When Jiang Nongqin heard this, a faint sarcasm appeared at the corner of her lips. She raised her hand and ordered the troops to put away their longbows. Zhang Zhaoshu looked at Nongqin's attire, and a trace of contempt flashed across her eyes. From her point of view, Nongqin was the most unladylike woman. She should be drowned in a pig cage and ridden on a wooden donkey. Let's go. Jiang Nongqin ordered a troop to cover the rear in case Zhang Zhaoshu attacked from behind. The rest of the people retreated in an orderly manner. Shangguan waited at the rear with rapid breathing. Seeing this situation, she slowly breathed a sigh of relief. A woman who bullies the weak and fears the strong is the easiest to get rid of. Jiang Nongqin came back with a cold face and concluded. Shangguan burst out laughing, and her nervousness disappeared. I suddenly realized that Sister Nongqin's way of doing things is very similar to Brother Lanting's. How can I be compared to Langjun? Jiang Nongqin shook her head and turned over to get on the horse. Let's go. Shangguan had learned horsemanship and archery when she was still in her boudoir. Later on, when the kidnappers happened, the residents hired a martial arts teacher for her. She also knew martial arts, not to mention that she had stayed in the troops' camp for more than half a year. If she fought seriously, some of the male troops might not be her match. Of course, since Shangguan had never seen blood on her hands, she would definitely be the one to die if they fought to the death. The journey to the north was rather difficult. The surrounding refugees not only coveted their clothes and food, but also the women in the camp. When they were approaching the border of Wanzhou, even Sheng Guanwan had killed a few people. The situation is unstable. There is a war in the north. The Tsingy army and the Red Lotus group are fighting fiercely. After more than half a month, the 2,000 troops had lost a lot of weight. Sheng Guanwan, who had always been pampered, had also lost weight. Her skin had darkened, but she had become much more capable. Sheng Guanwan had a saber hanging on her waist. She was dressed in clothes that could barely keep out the cold, and she wore a coarse cloak. Even so, most of the people who are implicated are innocent people. Sheng Guanwan's face was gloomy. She really could not relax in such a hellish scene. Along the way, the increasingly harsh and cruel reality taught her a harsh lesson. In the outside world, there were no luxurious clothes and no tall buildings. Corpses that died of illness or froze to death by the roadside were one after another. Birds that could not find food in winter fed on the corpses, and they would peck a complete corpse until it was broken. If the battles in the inner chamber were like needles hidden in silk floss, and the tongue was the most powerful weapon, then the battles in the outside world were different. There were too many factors that could threaten the lives of the common people. The bitter cold of winter, the shortage of food, the bandits who spread rumors of killing, the two rebel armies that fought everywhere and injured the people by mistake. Not only that, but they also had to guard against their companions. Chapter 482. Jiang Nongqin looked at Sheng Guanwan's serious side profile and sighed secretly. If a woman's growth had to be built on injuries, it would be too cruel. After a short rest, everyone in the troop set off again. After the 5th day of the new year, Xiangyang district recovered from the joy of the new year. Restaurants, tea houses, and other shops opened one by one. The people in the district headquarters also began to actively prepare for the battle after the spring plowing. The training of the new recruits became stricter and stricter. At the same time, they had to recruit soldiers and horses everywhere. In other words, the subordinates were still working overtime. As the Lord, Jiang Pingji was still slacking off. However, there was one more person slacking off with her. It was Zhang Ping from the Mahas family. As the saying goes, a pillow comes after a nap. Jiang Pingji was still complaining that the scholars from the Mahas family were all dead. There was not even a shadow of them. Then, Zhang Ping came to her on his own initiative. After careful observation, she found that Zhang Ping was very intelligent and was a promising talent. Therefore, she brought Zhang Ping with her all day long and taught him about the woodworking workshop. My lord's wonderful ideas are really admirable. For an otaku who was addicted to mechanisms, what could be more attractive than a variety of model figurines? Jiang Pingji took him to see the models of various siege weapons. After her selection and training, the craftsmen in the woodworking workshop could already make some simple models of the weapons according to the blueprints. These models were not just for show. If they were enlarged according to the scale, they would be real siege weapons. Zhang Ping did not know that attacking and defending a city could be played in this way. It was very interesting. Zhang Ping, who was originally indifferent to this matter, was now also interested. How to make the defending party pay the least price to defend the city. How to make the attacking party pay the least price to take down the city. His mind was full of these thoughts. He even threw aside the water wheel that he had been studying previously. If Jiang Pingji had not accidentally seen his things, he did not know when the water wheel would see the light of day again. What is this? Jiang Pingji poked the water wheel model. Did you make it? Zhang Ping was startled for a moment. He smiled and said, yes. I saw that the farmers had a hard time irrigating, so I thought about how to save manpower and make irrigation more convenient. However, I tried several times, but I always failed. You see, it's not smooth, but I don't know what the reason is. Zhang Ping's ambition was to be a hermit, with a beautiful wife and a crane, living a carefree life. The direction of his research was also biased towards the livelihood of the people, unlike Jiang Pingji. Apart from improving farming tools in the beginning, the rest of her research was applied to war. Jiang Pingji said, let me take a look. The water wheel was indeed a very bold design. To the viewers in the live broadcast room, It was very normal. However, in today's world, it was truly shocking. If Zhang Ping's research was successful, and it was put into practice, who knew how many people would benefit? Jiang Pingji was very concerned about the people's livelihood. Naturally, she hoped that the water wheel would succeed. In addition to the water wheel, Zhang Ping also had a pulley for fetching water. This thing had been around for a long time, but it was not widely used. Zhang Ping planned to use it to fetch water. His explanation was also very simple. Some people lived high up in the mountains, but the rivers were at the foot of the mountains. If they wanted to drink water, they had to go down the mountain to fetch water, which was time-consuming and laborious. However, if they installed this pulley and tied a hemp rope to a wooden bucket, they could directly throw it down the mountain, which was convenient and laborious. It could also be installed on the wells, making it easier for the commoners to fetch water. It's a good idea. Jiang Pingji nodded in agreement. She did not care how it was to be installed on the mountain, but the wells could be installed. Previously, when she looked at the files of the district headquarters, several cases of well drowning were written on it. When the victim was fetching water, the bucket was too heavy, which caused his center of gravity to shift forward. He accidentally fell into the mouth of the well and lost his life. If it was installed on the mouth of the well, the commoners only had to squat by the well to fetch water safely. The safety factor would increase significantly. In the dead of winter, Feng Jin and the rest looked coldly at Zhang Ping as he busied himself. He led the craftsmen of the woodworking workshop to install the pulley for the wells in Xiangyang district, and taught the commoners seriously how to use it. It was still in the dead of winter. What kind of temptation could make a hermit, who was detached from worldly affairs, willingly do such hard labor? Why are you all looking at me like that? Jiang Pingji comfortably drank hot tea to warm herself. She planned to dry some dried fruits next year, so that she could make tea in winter. When she raised her head, a few of her subordinates looked at her strangely. Jiang Pingji felt a little creeped out. Have the improved seeds for spring plowing been distributed? Have the farming tools been arranged? Have the cattle been allocated? Have the fields of each household been counted? If not, why are you looking at me? Get to work. Everyone sneered in their hearts. Then they buried their heads in work. They had never seen such a shameless person. This person was actually their lord. The only one who did not find it strange was probably Wei Ci. Ever since he decided to push Zhang Ping into the fire pit, he knew that such a day would come. As a friend, he did not wish for Zhang Ping's talents to be buried in the wilderness. In today's world, one could not live in peace by hiding. With such thoughts in mind, Wei Ci filtered suitable candidates with a clear conscience. He planned to conquer Fengyi County after the spring plowing, and send letters to his companions one by one. As an injured person who was still recuperating, he could not work for too long. He could not bear to see a group of colleagues working day and night. The only way was to find someone to share the work. There was a shortage of talents. If it was not for Zhang Ping's incompetence in government affairs, he would have pulled him over to work like a slave. The work in the government office was quite heavy. The only praiseworthy thing was the food in the small kitchen. I like this braised pork with vinegar sauce the most. It's sweet and sour. I really don't know where my lord found such a good chef. Compared to the food I've eaten before, it's like chaff. There were 10 small plates on the table in front of Su Ku, enough to fill up 4 to 5 mouthfuls of food. Although they were all meat dishes, there were 2 bowls of vegetable soup that tasted great. Feng Jin silently agreed with this. Hiding behind his sleeves, he secretly touched his somewhat bloated belly. It was so delicious that they wished they could freeload 3 meals a day at the district headquarters. Only delicious food could eliminate their resentment of working overtime. Jiang Pingji's food was no different from that of her subordinates, but she had a large appetite. The amount of each meal was 3 to 4 times that of others. I suddenly thought of something, Jiang Pingji said. Why don't we secretly open a restaurant? Everyone was drinking tea to aid digestion after eating. When they heard that Jiang Pingji wanted to stir up trouble again, their nerves tensed up. However, Wei Ci gently answered, "Why did my lord have such an idea? Those in power should not compete with the people for benefits. Otherwise, if the government and the business combined, how could the people's businesses survive? If his lord took the lead in doing so, it would be difficult to suppress the trend in the future. Chapter 483. What did they think? Was there a need to ask this question? Jiang Pingji's suggestion was undoubtedly a divine weapon to increase their favorability. If favorability could be quantified, she might be able to see that the favorability of her subordinates had soared to the highest level of loyalty. No matter what happened in the future, they would not easily change their minds. Jiang Pingji thought about it and added, "If we open a restaurant, we need waiters, people who do chores in the backyard, and shopkeepers who manage the restaurant. A medium-sized restaurant needs to employ at least 20 to 30 people. Orphans, widows, or those who are disabled because of the war can find a suitable position to support their families if they don't have a job. After all, if we ask them to farm, it's really difficult for them." Everyone was touched by Jiang Pingji's words. Wei Ci showed a dazed expression and fell into his memories. Fighting with the people for benefits was indeed criticized. But what if the money she earned was all used on the orphans of the war, and the elderly, who had no one to support them, and the soldiers who were disabled because of injuries? How would they make a living after leaving the battlefield? In Wei Ci's memory, other than the person in front of him, it seemed that no feudal lord would take these problems seriously. Many feudal lords just handed matters over to their subordinates, just to fight for a good reputation of benevolence and love for the people. With a good reputation, their goal would be achieved. As for how the future would develop, they did not have the energy to care at all. This led to a period of time when the situation slightly relaxed. The silver allocated for retirement would be exploited layer by layer. In the end, only a few coins would fall into the hands of orphans and widows. But Her Majesty was different. She really did it. It was just that she did the best, but her reputation was the worst. Why was it like this? Wei Ci looked at Jiang Pingji in a daze. Because this person's temperament was too casual and arrogant. She only needed to capture anyone who coveted this batch of pension money, and let the greedy person gather 10 times, or even 100 times the amount of money to return. Her attitude was unyielding, and whoever dared to disobey her, without exception, would end up with their heads rolling on the ground. Unfortunately, these people had a glib tongue and were eloquent. They smeared her reputation behind her back. What about Her Majesty? My time is precious, I don't care to argue with ants. In this life, he would be the one to argue. While Wei Ci was in a daze, Feng Jin had already bowed with his hands folded in front. My lord's action is a good deed. Jin will naturally support it with all my might. If the generals and soldiers unfortunately died in battle, their orphans and widows would have someone to rely on and provide for them. The disabled soldiers would also be able to make a living. If this is feasible, I believe the soldiers will be completely at ease and not have to worry about the future. This action was benevolent to Feng Jin and the others, but to Jiang Pingji, it was a matter of course. The soldiers were willing to risk their lives for her, so she naturally had to be worthy of their loyalty. Feng Jin and the rest were moved by Jiang Pingji's growth. The audience in the streaming room also started discussing it. Lao Siji Lianmeng. I started following the live stream not long after it started. Looking back, the streamer has really grown a lot. It wasn't that the host wasn't good in the past. It was just that she was too tough and self-centered in the past. Now she was becoming more and more like a benevolent ruler, more and more in line with what an excellent ruler should be like. For the people in troubled times, this was a blessing. Qijing Pokalai. I hope that when I'm old, I can still continue following the live stream with my grandchildren and tell them how outstanding the streamer is. Although she's just Jiang Pingji, she led a group of subordinates to conquer the world and gave the people a peaceful and contented life. Hehe live stream, you must not let us down. You are these beasts. If I were a commoner, it would definitely be a very happy thing to be protected by the streamer like this. Beauting. I believe that the streamer can become a true emperor, unprecedented and unsurpassed. Wangban Yinjing. I hope that in my lifetime, I can see my lord rule the world. The live stream room was full of praises. Even Jiang Pingji, who was as thick-skinned as the corner of the city wall, felt somewhat embarrassed. If that's the case, Then I'll get someone to organize the menu. Jiang Pingji thought about it and said hesitantly, the income from the restaurant business is all used to provide for orphans and widows. In the beginning, the scale is small, and the income is not high, so others naturally don't care about it. But in the future, with these unique flavors and dishes, I think the business of the restaurant will not be too bad, and the income will naturally increase. I'm a little worried. If the income was a few coins, who would care about it? But what if it was easily tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of strings of coins? Jiang Pingji did not think that anyone would not be tempted. Lian was a little naive. From his point of view, no matter how good the business of the restaurant was, how high could the income be? Not to mention that the restaurant had not even opened yet. But his lord was already worried that someone would embezzle money in the future. He asked, the income is used to provide for orphans and widows of the soldiers who died in the war, as well as compensation for the bereaved. Would there really be beasts who would embezzle money? Wei Ci smiled and said, even Han Mei said that those people are beasts. How can we use the thinking of ordinary people to measure them? I think that my lord's worries are not without reason. It's better to be prepared for a rainy day, since this is for the good of the soldiers, so that they will no longer have to worry about the future when they go to the battlefield. Then this matter cannot be treated casually. Punish those who are greedy, lest the soldiers' hearts turn cold. What does my lord think? Of course, Zixiao's words make sense. Jiang Pingji raised her brows. Currently, we only have one base in Xiangyang district. The scale of the restaurant is not large, and the income is not high. If we use this bit of money to provide for orphans and widows of the soldiers, everyone will think it is absurd. How about this? I will donate 20,000 strings of coins as the initial compensation. If it is not enough, I will add more in the future. Wei Ci's fingers trembled. He almost could not keep the expression on his face. 20,000 strings of coins? Had his lord ever been so extravagant? Didn't she always want to break a coin into 4 coins to use? Looking around, it seemed that no one was surprised. This was 20,000 strings of coins, not 2 coins. Others did not know. But Suku was very clear about how rich his lord's private treasury was. Not to mention 20,000 strings of coins. Even if it was 200,000 strings of coins, she could still take it out. Sai, who asked the people of the north borderline to be stupid, rich and squandering. They were too rich. They were too extravagant. They were practically fighting to buy glass tea sets and jewelry. No one could stop them. Not only that, the business of wool products in Chongzhou was also not bad. In a short period of time, they had accumulated tens of thousands of strings of coins. The first batch of silver was mostly used for the construction of Xiangyang district, the purchase of rations, armor, and the manufacture of weapons. The second batch of silver was the one that truly entered the lord's private treasury. After receiving it, his lord generously gave each of her subordinates a big red packet. Even Feng Jin's family's Chongqing was given a 1-month gift. It was unbelievably extravagant. If there was a ranking list of the feudal lord's wealth in the future, his lord would probably occupy the top spot all year round. Jiang Pingji looked around. Then this matter. Chapter 484. It was easy to make mistakes in this matter. Only those who were meticulous and determined could do it. If it was done well, it would be a great plus. The things at the beginning were not complicated. Wei Ci could handle it with his current physical condition. When the workload increased in the future, his body would probably recover. More importantly, she felt that Wei Ci could be trusted. He had the ambition to rule the world. Money could not blind him. Wei Ci accepted it without hesitation. He was thinking of formulating a relatively complete compensation process. I will not let you down. Combining the experience from his previous life and the analysis and improvement in this life, he felt that he was the most suitable person to do this. Yes. Remember to get Xiaoyu to approve the 20,000 strings of coins. Yes. Jiang Pingji did not value money. She often used her private treasury as the public treasury and left it to the accountant to manage. Suku did not know whether to laugh or cry at her attitude. Throughout the ages, which leader did not use the public treasury as his private treasury? His lord was capricious and reversed the roles. It was reasonable that Jiang Pingji did not feel distressed about the money. It came from the strong wind. Why would she feel distressed? Speaking of which, the north borderline had already sold 4 batches of glass. Jiang Pingji felt that she could slow down and whet the appetite of the fat sheep. After the first month, the weather was still so cold. The entire Xiangyang district had an atmosphere of impending war. The people faintly felt that the atmosphere was subtle. The government office was busy again. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions and fodder go first. War was not only a contest of military strength, tactics, and wisdom, but also a contest of financial resources and logistics. Rations and fodder, horses, siege equipment, armors, weapons. Every one of them burned money. Especially defensive armors and weapons used in war, they cost a lot of money. Jiang Pingji could not let her soldiers go to the battlefield in plain clothes and holding a wooden spear. That was not a battlefield. It was queuing up to talk to the king of hell. It was sending the enemy's head. Jiang Pingji heard the statistics in the account book given by Suku and secretly said, "Poor. If she could make armor here." Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes and thought of the plan she made when she first came to Xiangyang district. Xiangyang district was very likely to contain iron ore. However, whether the iron ore was real or not was her personal judgment. She could not be completely sure. Once she had some free time, she planned to bring some people to investigate. If there really was an iron mine, it would save a lot of money. After the long winter training, the new soldiers had already adapted to the heavy training. Coupled with the ample food and water supply, not only did the soldiers not lose weight, but they also became stronger. The old clothes that originally fit them seemed a little tight on their bodies. Before, he couldn't even carry a load for 3 to 5 miles, but now he could carry a log and run a round trip. Therefore, a person's potential was like a sponge that could be squeezed out with some squeezing. There was no need to be lenient when it came to training these burly male soldiers. As long as they didn't die, then they would work them to death. Not only did the recruits and veterans have to undergo all kinds of physical training, but they also had to practice military formations. In ancient times, the methods of transmitting information were too backward, especially in a place like a battlefield that was constantly changing. Military formations could maximize the effectiveness of the soldiers' cooperation in battle, such as cutting the enemy's formation, surrounding them, outflanking them, and strategically retreating. All these required extremely strong execution. Jiang Pingji would not allow even one deserter from her army. As long as you're told to charge, you'll have to do it no matter what. If you were told to retreat, even if the enemy's head was in your hands, you couldn't be greedy for the spoils of battle. They had to follow orders strictly and strictly, over and over. They had to repeat it in a dull manner, until they developed a reflexive reaction that could immediately act when they heard orders. After the first month of the lunar year, the people in the men's camp clearly felt that the atmosphere was much more solemn than before. Their training was enhanced, and their meals were better. The sky was pitch black. As soon as the military camp's whistle sounded, the soldiers had to get up and put on their clothes as quickly as possible and gather at the drill ground. In the beginning, most of the soldiers couldn't do it. After a long time, those who couldn't do it before could also do it. Of course, there was another important reason why they would put in so much effort in training. They were stimulated by the hundreds of female soldiers in the women's camp. Ever since the mocking incident in the recruit camp, Jiang Pingji would post an explanation notice every few days. The people of Xiangyang district were skeptical at the beginning, but they became skeptical later on. Some families felt that the girls were a hindrance, so they made up their minds and sent the more cumbersome girls at home to the women's camp. The number of people in the women's camp slowly increased to 600, finally reaching the expected number. Jiang Pingji didn't let others take over the training of the women's camp. Instead, she took the field herself. Upon seeing the situation, Suka secretly shed tears of sympathy for the young ladies in the women's camp. He was one of the few people who knew about his lord's ability to ruthlessly destroy flowers. As expected, the people in the women's camp who were looked down upon by the outside world, and even had a contemptuous attitude, officially ushered in a hellish life. The training load was only 20% less than that of the male soldiers. For these thin and weak girls, it was cruel. Jiang Pingji was usually easy to talk to, but once she entered the instructor mode, unless the female soldiers couldn't stand the exhaustion and fainted, or there were other unavoidable circumstances, she wouldn't show any mercy at all. As long as they were awake, as long as their noses could still breathe, even if they had to crawl on the ground to the finish line. The viewers in the streaming room couldn't take it anymore. Streamer, if you treat cute girls like this, be careful of the wrath of the heavens. Streamer V. When I entered the military school at the age of 5 or 6, the training I went through was heavier than this. In today's world, cute girls are used to be bullied. Without the ability to protect themselves, they can only become the playthings of others. If you pity them, it's not love but harm. If they suffer a little now, they will suffer less in the future. I love them, do you understand? If you love them, then train them to their death. This was Jiang Pingji's consistent dogma. Lao Siji Lianming. Children don't understand the streamer's love, but they will understand in the future. Kizio Bupaba. Although it's a little distressing, what the streamer said is also right. In troubled times, no one can protect anyone. If they don't want to be treated as a reproduction machine, an item to be bought and sold, or a reserve of food, these girls can only rely on themselves to work hard. Looking at the content of the streaming, almost all of them cried when they were kidnapped by their families. They were obviously abandoned by their families. Even if they didn't suffer with the streamer, they would still be tortured at home. Jintian Sangeng. I hope they can learn something from the streamer. No matter how weak a grass is, it can still overcome the oppression of a stubborn rock. A group of girls ranging in age from 13 to 16 cried miserably while gritting their teeth to train. Long-distance running with weights was fine. They could still dawdle and slack off for a while on the way. Weapon training was miserable. If one's posture was not standard, Jiang Pingji would use a rolled-up whip to help correct it. Her attitude was extremely strict. Chapter 485. What was annoying was that after soaking in the medicinal herbs provided by the military camp, their muscles were no longer so sore. They couldn't even find an excuse to be lazy. It was still winter. If they didn't want to freeze to death, they could only keep exercising to generate heat. If they fell behind, they might be buried in the snow and freeze to death. Their lord also warned them that if anyone froze to death in the snow, she wouldn't be responsible. They could either lie down and freeze to death, or grit their teeth and get up. No one wanted to die. Even ants wanted to live, let alone these young girls from poor families. Faced with the crisis of survival during training, everyone was full of energy and would occasionally help each other. If you help me this time, I'll help you next time. I promise to survive every dark day. With the increase in training, their appetite would definitely increase. Their appetite was like that of a kitten. Now it was as if they were fighting to be reincarnated. Jiang Pingji's attitude toward the female soldiers was quite strict. It could even be considered harsh. The male soldiers felt chills down their spines when they saw it. Others couldn't bear to hurt them. But Jiang Pingji wouldn't go easy on them. Once she gave these young girls the illusion that they would get preferential treatment if they acted coquettishly and pitifully, they wouldn't really work hard. Instead, they would be fearless. Regardless of whether it was women or men, they all had a natural laziness in their bones. Jiang Pingji couldn't let this laziness sprout. Instead, she had to kill it in the cradle. Therefore, Jiang Pingji didn't show any mercy from beginning to end. Her heart was as hard as iron. She didn't even show a trace of gentleness. Unlike the male camp, apart from basic physical training and weapons training, there was no military drill in the female camp. Instead, there was a course on first aid skills. She recruited one of the doctors she hired to be the temporary lecturer. Not only did he have to impart the first aid knowledge and skills that Jiang Pingji had created, but he also had to teach them basic medical skills. At first, the doctor thought it was a fantasy. However, when there was a high reward, there would always be brave men. The doctor gave in. It was like this every day for more than 2 months. I believe it now. She's preparing to use women as men. It had been more than 2 months since Jiang Pingji taught the new recruits a lesson. The female soldiers in the female camp had undergone earth-shaking changes. His slender figure and timid expression were gone, replaced by a well-proportioned figure and a serious expression. Girls nowadays were about 1.5 to 1.6 meters tall. Very few were taller than that. Jiang Pengji was an exception. Due to the large amount of training and sufficient nutrition, these little girls had the tendency to continue to grow. After nightfall, the female soldiers had some free time. 10 people to a tent, and the beds were all next to each other. Hearing the girl in the same tent grumble, the other female soldiers couldn't help but complain. Even men aren't that pitiful, right? I have a brother who is also in the men's barracks. I heard he has it much easier than us. The 10 girls were silent for a while, and the atmosphere was eerily quiet. After a while, I heard that the district headquarters recruited women to serve the men. It scared me to death. They were all unmarried girls. They didn't understand the relationship between men and women, but they knew what a prostitute was. How could a girl from a pure family be willing to lower herself to become a lowly prostitute? A female soldier who was lying in a warm blanket said softly, "Now, I don't know if I should be happy or cry. They should be happy that they didn't have to be prostitutes, but they had been crying all this time. Every day, they almost crawled back to their tents. A few of them hid in their blankets and cried bitterly. The female soldier from before turned over and lied on her stomach. I heard my brother say, 'Our salaries will be coming tomorrow.' We have salaries?" Everyone was stunned. Why didn't they know about it? Yes, my brother accidentally heard it. He said that everyone gets 100 copper coins and 2 buckets of rice a month. This was not a high standard, but considering that the female soldiers used the barracks for food, drink, and clothing, it wasn't low. "Is this news accurate?" the others quickly asked. "It should be accurate. After all, we are soldiers too. According to the Lord, we have to go to the battlefield to kill enemies in the future. Otherwise, why do we learn these things?" Speaking of this, the female soldier added with a smile, "I heard that in the barracks next door, everyone receives the same salary as us." At this moment, a 15 or 16-year-old girl shrunk her neck and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid of death." Another said, "Look at what you're saying. Who isn't afraid of death? When I was sent here by my stepmother, I wanted to just die like that. But now, I can go to the battlefield and kill enemies. If I accidentally make military contributions in the future, I might even be able to become a female general. Just like those novels in the past, how awe-inspiring. Is this okay? Their salaries are the same as those men. Why is it different if they make military contributions?" The group of young girls thought silently. It didn't seem impossible. At this moment, a girl lying in the innermost part of the tent spoke. "I'd rather die on the battlefield than go home. If I go home, I might be sold to some ugly man as a wife. I'll be beaten every day and live worse than the pigs at home. It's better to beat people, it hurts too much." Speaking of beating people, these young girls had something to talk about. "My sister was beaten to death by her mother-in-law. After marrying into their family, she didn't have a day of rest. She would be slapped every time she ate a few more mouthfuls of food. If she was late to work in the fields, she would be beaten even harder. Later, when she was 9 months pregnant, her mother-in-law still beat her. She sprained her ankle and fell to the ground. That old B*TCH said she was pretending. In the end, the child and sister died. That old B*TCH was fine. If I get married in the future, whoever dares to beat me will be beaten to the ground." Hee, can you beat them? Those old men are really strong. Learn well now. If you can't beat them, do you want to be beaten? What if you're beaten to death? Come on, they don't have much strength. We don't have enough to eat all day. Why would we be afraid of a weakling? Chatting before bed was almost the only fun for the female soldiers. The training during the day was heavy, and there were people patrolling at night, so they fell asleep very quickly. The next day, there were indeed people carrying food and copper coins. This news made the female soldiers excited. Each of them received 200 coins and 4 buckets of rice. That was 2 months' worth of salary. Before they could get over their excitement, Jiang Pengji, who had traumatized everyone, appeared. Many of them subconsciously shivered. "Have all of you received your salary?" she asked. More than 2 months was enough for the female soldiers to know Jiang Pingji's character. When answering questions, they must shout and answer loudly. Chapter 486. Jiang Pingji glanced at the crowd. Copper coins are easy to deal with. You can put them anywhere. But you live in the barracks, and you don't have to pay for the food. So, what do you plan to do with the food you receive? Do you send it home to your parents and brothers? Or do you exchange it for copper coins and keep it for yourself? The crowd didn't understand what she meant, but the audience in the streaming room understood instantly. Lao Siji Lianmeng. Streamer, you're so bad. Jingtian Sigung. Ha, the streamer is up to something bad. She's alienating these female soldiers from their families. This batch of female soldiers were almost unwilling. They were seen as burdens and abandoned by their families and were forced to join them. At that time, these families thought that the girls were there to be prostitutes in the camp, but they still gave them away. It was clear what kind of people they were. Such coldness made even Jiang Pingji feel a little bitterly disappointed. Therefore, she wanted to know whether the fruits of the girls' hard training would be kept for themselves or given away selflessly. It turned out that Jiang Pingji's subtle influence during this period was effective. Some stubborn female soldiers hoped to exchange the food for copper coins and keep it for themselves, but there were still more than 200 girls who chose to give their salaries to their families to help them. Jiang Pingji's eyes showed some interest. Those who chose to keep it for themselves, you did well. It's not unfilial. You just made the most correct decision. Jiang Pingji said leisurely. As for those who chose to help their families, you are very kind. I don't know how much merit your families have done in their previous lives to have such good daughters in this life. It's a pity that they didn't cherish you. You'll walk your own path in the future. Let's start today's training. The female soldiers were still anxious, but when they heard Jiang Pingji's words, they had mixed feelings. When she said the training would start, they tensed up one by one. The morning and the first 2 hours of the afternoon were physical training to learn how to defeat the enemy. The rest of the time was to learn first aid from the doctor. From that month onward, there would be an assessment every 10 days. Those who failed would have a part of their salaries deducted, while those who performed well would be rewarded. Under such encouragement, no one dared to take it lightly. Pa! The wooden spear in the female soldier's hand fell, and a numb feeling came from her wrist. Jiang Pingji said calmly, "Pick it up and continue." She let each female soldier fight with her once, and each of them had their wooden spear knocked away as soon as they came up. Jiang Pingji pointed out the points that they should pay attention to. She spoke in detail, and the girls listened attentively. Only after all of them had been taught a lesson would they know where they had gone wrong, and be more careful next time. Jiang Pingji believed in one rule. Before learning to hit someone, one must first learn to be hit. Compared to the training of the wooden spear, Jiang Pingji taught them more about close combat. She taught them how to counterattack when they were at a disadvantage in all aspects. The female soldiers felt a little shy at first. It was too cruel and dirty, but after they got used to it, they felt that it was quite exciting. Nowadays, women's bodies were generally weaker than men's. This disadvantage couldn't be changed in a short time, so it was better to choose to play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses. Since his strength was inferior to his enemies, he would increase his speed and agility. When killing enemies on the battlefield, the only thing that mattered was whether the enemy died or not how the enemy died. The scale of the women's battalion was small. Jiang Pingji would not let them be the vanguard. She would definitely start with logistics and cleaning up the battlefield. She would first see some blood and train up their courage. Once their physical qualities were generally strengthened, she would have the next step in her plan. At the end of the day, there were 2 reasons why women had such a low status in society. Firstly, it was because of their bodies. Secondly, it was because their labor productivity was lower than that of men. The strength of the former could directly affect the benefits of the latter. In Jiang Pingji's world, there was a series of training methods for women's physical fitness. It could also be called the art of physical training. She slowly prepared for it for a few years. She eliminated some of the segments that could not be achieved with current technology and added other training programs. Then, She integrated them into a book and prepared to use it specifically for the women's battalion. All female soldiers in the women's battalion had to follow the training. If she really sat on the throne, she would promote it to the whole country. In this era, the difference in physical qualities between men and women was not as great as imagined. As long as they trained properly and had sufficient food and nutrition, the gap between them was very small. Jiang Pingji was still working hard to improve farming techniques to reduce physical exertion as much as possible. In this way, the difference in labor productivity would be further reduced. The only thing that was troublesome was that women had their menstrual periods every month. The gestation period was as long as 10 months. In addition to postpartum recovery, while a year passed in the blink of an eye. On the other hand, men did not have such worries. Regarding this, Jiang Pingji was really at her wits' end. After all, in this era, reproduction could only rely on the most backward method of artificial reproduction. If women gave birth less, the population would not increase. Therefore, those who tormented the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women and prevented widows from remarrying were idiots. The emperor of Zhongzhou was even more retarded. This world was not like her previous world. Both parents only had to go to a specialized institution for surgery and pick up the child at the specified time. According to the federal law, which woman or person dared to let a woman give birth naturally was against the law. Even so, most federal citizens still did not like to have children because it was too troublesome. Seeing the population decline and the war population consumption was high, to alleviate the population pressure, the federal government had no choice but to pass a bill and start the population growth plan. When both men and women came of age, there would be compulsory donations. The government would screen for good genes and breed high-quality babies. The specific information of both parents would be written on the child's ID card to prevent blood relations from going haywire. After the baby was born, the federal government would be responsible for all the upbringing. According to the technology of this era, they could only be a dream. There was no way to avoid the menstrual period, because the genes of women were still in a relatively inferior stage. This problem could not be eradicated, but she could think of ways to delay the gestation period. For example, female soldiers were allowed to retire in their 20s. Before retirement, they were not allowed to have any childbirth activities. After retirement, they would be given all kinds of preferential treatment. Some female soldiers could even stay in the military camp and continue to be instructors to train the next generation. They did not have to go to the battlefield, they only had to take care of logistics. Under such circumstances, the female soldiers could find someone to marry and have children with peace of mind. Jiang Pingji was also a little worried about the age limit. It was too late. In the eyes of the world, people of the same age as them were already old enough to be grandmothers. The female soldiers were a group of old women. It was too early, and their military service time was too short. It was a waste of resources. Jiang Pingji did not want to let them go. She told this problem to a group of subordinates, wanting to seek their opinions. Said it at 24 years old. Wei Xi thought about it and said, "This age should be more suitable." Qiguan Rang seconded. "My lord, you really don't have to be so careful. The military registration has always been different from other things. You can make the decision." In this era, soldiers had a specific military registration. Female soldiers were treated equally, so naturally there was one. However, to let the female soldiers marry after 24 years old was not like the palace maids. Once they entered the palace, they could never come out again. Li Yun, this honest child, had a problem. Isn't it too late to get married at 24 years old? Can you find a man who is still unmarried? Jiang Pingji glanced sideways and said disdainfully, "You can choose the male soldiers you captured after defeating the enemy." Chapter 487. Pick at will. These 3 words echoed in everyone's mind. Wei Xi relied on his superhuman willpower to hold back his laughter. His Majesty was still so overbearing and willful. As for the others, well, they were shocked at first, but they quickly accepted this setting. Normally, the captives were sent by the demons to do hard labor and labor. No one cared about them. Now that they were given a chance to form a family, the captives might fight for it. However, in order not to give the captives a sense of superiority, or even treat the female soldiers harshly, they felt that this matter had to be considered at length. Jiang Pingji was stunned and asked, "Why do you say so?" Feng Jin said, "A captive is a captive. They belong to the slave register, and are of the lower class. My lord's action may be misinterpreted." If someone else publicized that Jiang Pingji had captured slaves, and assigned them female soldiers as wives, would this be acceptable? Jiang Pingji was stunned. This seemed to make sense. However, if the female soldiers retired in their 20s, the men of the same age were either married twice, or even thrice. Who knew how many children they had? Wouldn't it be even more unfair to let the female soldiers that she had meticulously trained marry someone else and become a stepmother? She wanted to hear what they had to say. Qiguan Rang understood what he meant and explained to Jiang Pingji with a faint smile. If the captives are used to reward the female soldiers, form a family, and settle the marriage issue, then the household register should be headed by the female soldiers, so that the children born in the future won't follow their father into the slave register. If we don't do this, my lord's painstaking efforts will be in vain. Feng Jin said, "Wenjing's words are what I mean." Jiang Pingji was dumbfounded. Her subordinate suggested to let the female soldiers be the head of the household register. What did this mean? It meant that the children born in the future must follow the female soldiers, including their surnames. She never thought that her subordinate would be so open-minded. She didn't even have the confidence to propose this. The viewers in the streaming room were so surprised that they threw away the melon in their hands and typed furiously to express their shock. Jintian Jigung. Damn streamer, go and confirm if Qiguan Rang has been transmigrated. He has such advanced thinking. Even here, if the children want to follow their mother's surname, they either discuss it with the husband and have a second child to follow their mother's surname, or the husband marries into the family and becomes a live-in son-in-law. Tuda Feiqiu. I feel like I'm watching a fake live stream. How could ancient men be so open-minded? Samiran Zaiwoxia. There must be something wrong with my ears. How could Uncle Qiguan Rang say something like that? Lao Siji Lianmeng. #despise. What's there to be surprised about? On the contrary, I think their thinking is very normal. They haven't broken away from the constraints of this era. First of all, they didn't see the captives as people. The captives were used to reward the female soldiers. Do you know what a reward is? They were just objects. Under such circumstances, the children born by the female soldiers followed the man's household registration. This behavior was very humiliating. In the end, were they using female soldiers to reward the captives, or were they using the captives to reward the female soldiers? The meaning of the two was completely different. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with suggesting that female soldiers should be the head of household registration. Guikai Guofeng Xiao. Although I understand what you mean, I'm still shocked. Xingxing Big Boss Calais. Thank you for your explanation. But I have a question. What if the captive has an affair? Defeated by you? Tisk cheating? Wasn't there a crime of adultery in ancient times? The streamer also emphasized severe punishment. You should worry about whether the captive's husband will cheat, and whether the female soldiers will beat him to death. You shouldn't worry about whether the wife will seek death if the husband cheats. According to their conclusion after watching the live stream for a long time, in this era, killing a prostitute was not considered murder. On the contrary, once the prostitute was discovered, both men and women would have to bear great punishment, especially when the streamer deliberately increased the punishment. They believed that the female soldiers taught by the streamer were definitely not weak girls. Ahem, that's a good idea. Think about it again, and come up with a regulation. Inform the female battalion in 2 days. Jiang Pingji was best at making a start, and then throwing the matter to her subordinates. Feng Jin and the others secretly sighed. Sure enough, it was like that again. 3 days later, everyone in the female battalion received a draft notice. Among them were 1 or 2 girls who used to be rich. However, they were too young and could not keep their family property after their families broke up. Instead, They were sent to the brothel by their relatives. Of course, now that she knew it was not a brothel but a proper soldier, she was relieved. In addition, she knew how to read, so she was quickly promoted. In her free time, she taught the female soldiers how to read. She read the contents of the notice word by word. Everyone's mood was like sitting on a roller coaster, going up and down. Hearing that they had to be 24 years old before they could get married, and that they were not allowed to get married before that, everyone's faces turned pale. At the age of 24, people of the same age could prepare to be grandmothers, but they were still old ladies who could not get married. Many of them were worried about the rest of their lives and felt very sad. However, not long after, there was a turn of events. This is true. Can we really choose a husband? Corporal, look again. Is there a mistake? How can it be so absurd? Although they said it was absurd, their pair of black grape-like eyes were sparkling. They were eager to try it out. The corporal who could read nodded and said, "There's no mistake. What's written on it is true." They did not have to worry about not being able to get married at the age of 24, or marrying an old man to be a stepmother. They could choose a husband from among the captives, and bring him home to have a child. The child would have to take their surname. If that was the case, what would they have to worry about in the future? They were soldiers and received a monthly salary. If they saved it until they were 24 years old, it would be a considerable sum of money. They could buy a few acres of land and live comfortably as a wife. It would be wonderful. If they made great contributions in the past few years as soldiers, they might be promoted and live comfortably without farming. These were secondary. What touched them the most was that as the owner of the household register, the child would take their surname. One of the female soldiers said silently and secretly blushed. If that's the case, that's great. The contents of the notice were indeed a little shocking. But thinking about it carefully, it was all for their future. It seemed that there was nothing good about marrying early and having children. As a female soldier, there was still a long way to go. Fortunately, Xiangyang district was located in the north. These young ladies did not know about the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. With regards to this rebellious notice, other than a little fear, they were all eager to try it out. They could not wait to go to war now. If they made military contributions, their future would be miserable. Chapter 488. The effect of the notice was huge. Looking at the group of female soldiers holding their breath to train, Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows. She silently adjusted the training and increased the intensity. Another 10 days passed. The snow and ice melted. The wasteland that had been cleared last year could be prepared for farming. Plowing fields, farming tools, cattle and improved seeds have all been distributed. Xiangyang district gradually became lively. Everywhere was bustling with activity. Farmers could be seen working hard in the fields. Because the use of improved farming tools has been taught early on, it's easier now. Using the improved farming tools, the people were surprised to find that the farming efficiency was much higher than before. After plowing an acre of land, they didn't feel as tired as before. At a time when the war in the north was at loggerheads, such a flourishing scene made many people sigh with emotion. It was probably the only one in the whole north. Before the spring plowing, according to tradition, a spring plowing ceremony was held. The district magistrate was the host. Jiang Pengji did a lot of homework. She seriously memorized all the procedures. Originally, she only needed to put on a show and pose. The other steps would naturally be taken by someone else. However, she was stubborn and didn't like to fake it. She did it herself during the spring plowing ceremony. She carefully plowed an acre of land. Whether it was the depth of the plowing or other aspects, she was not inferior to the experienced farmers. The onlookers let out enthusiastic exclamations. Jiang Pengji won the applause of the crowd. My lord is still so serious and meticulous. Suku had already changed out of his formal Confucian robes. He wore a brown hemp garment. His trousers were rolled up to his knees. He looked like a farmer. Feng Jin was dressed neatly. He was the host of the spring plowing ceremony. He raised his eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Why didn't I know that my lord's farming skills are so good?" Changsheng followed her mother out to watch the spring plowing ceremony. She saw her father's shadow and vaguely called out, Father. She was dressed up like a lucky doll for the new year. Cold, cold. Father. Father. The little girl raised her little chubby finger and pointed at Feng Jin. As she shouted, saliva hung from the corner of her mouth. The clever Changsheng called him father for the first time after the New Year's banquet. After that, her speech became clearer. Wei Jingxian pursed her lips and chuckled. She carried Changsheng, who had become much heavier, and walked towards Feng Jin. When the Lord was in Hejian County, he learned it from an old farmer, Su Ku replied. He turned his head and said, Huayu, your daughter is calling for you. Feng Jin smiled and said, Jin will go take a look. Looking at the happy family, and thinking of his lovely wife who was far away in Hejian County, Su Ku felt a little envious. After the spring plowing ceremony, this year's spring plowing officially began, and the intensity of training suddenly increased. Sending troops to Fengyi County to deal with the Tsingyi army, there was a plan that had been made last year. Once the Lord had a firm foothold in the north, he might be able to bring Xuanmei over. At that moment, Jiang Pingji climbed up from the field barefooted. Just as she was about to raise her hand to wipe her sweat, she saw a messenger running from afar. She raised her hand to wipe her sweat and accidentally got some muddy water on her face. She asked the soldier, What happened? The messenger replied, My lord, there are more than 2,000 people outside the west gate. They claim to be from Hejian County, and they are my lord's trusted followers. From Hejian? Over 2,000 people? Jiang Pingji's eyes lit up, and the smile on her face deepened. She didn't even have time to wash her feet before she put on a pair of wooden clogs. Lead the way. It should be Nongqin and the rest. She walked as if she was flying and shouted at Su Ku, who had yet to react. Xiaoyu, I'll leave the matters in the field to you. I'm going to pick someone up. Su Ku was stunned. What? Just as he was about to ask in detail, his lord walked quickly with her long legs. The messenger behind her had to run to catch up with her. It's indeed Nongqin. She came just in time. Jiang Pingji ordered someone to open the city gate. She had a bright smile on her face. She had seen Jiang Nongqin's progress over the years. Jiang Pingji was very assured that she would be in charge of the women's camp. Not only her, but the audience in the streaming room had not seen Jiang Nongqin for a long time. The audience in the streaming room witnessed the transformation of this ancient girl from a weak and humble girl to a powerful one. They had a feeling that their daughter had just grown up. Hearing that Jiang Nongqin had finally come north from Hejian County to meet the streamer, the audience in the streaming room began to send waves of rewards to celebrate Jiang Nongqin's return. However, they never expected that Jiang Nongqin was not the only one who came. There was also an unexpected friend. A figure pounced toward Jiang Pingji like the wind. If not for the fact that the other person's aura was not malicious, she would have captured him. Brother Lanting, Wanner misses you so much. Jiang Pingji hurried out of the city. Shang Guanwan came up to her and gave her a bear hug. She laughed brightly, and her words were filled with deep longing. Wana, why are you here? Jiang Pingji was stunned. She lifted her hands to hold Shang Guanwan firmly, so that she would not fall with her. Seeing this, the messenger revealed a surprised expression. Chapter 489. She did not know what she had done to agitate Shang Guanwan, but she hugged her waist and cried in her arms. Jiang Pingji was startled, and immediately realized that something was wrong. Shang Guanwan was indeed lively and cheerful, but it did not mean that she did not have the upbringing of an aristocratic family. Therefore, according to Shang Guanwan, even if she was sad, she would not care about her image like she was now. Shang Guanwan knew her gender, but outsiders did not. She hugged a man and cried in public. Wouldn't people laugh at her for being shameless? Apart from that, she followed the troops from Hejian County to Xiangyang District. That itself was very thought-provoking. No matter how mischievous Shang Guanwan was, she would not run away from home. Jiang Pingji's face darkened. At that moment, Jiang Nongqin came forward and bowed to her respectfully. Subordinate Jiang Nongqin greets my lord. Get up. You don't have to be so courteous. Jiang Pingji frowned and asked Jiang Nongqin. Wanna left Hejian County with you? Yes, Jiang Nongqin replied. Jiang Nongqin replied. After a while, there was a tinge of indignation on her cold expression. As a woman who was once a victim, she could not bear to see such a tragedy. My lord, Lady Wan, this is a long story. She did not run away from home on her own. She had no choice. If she did not leave Hejian County, I'm afraid that you would only be able to see her grave in the future. Jiang Pingji's heart sank. She comforted the crying Shengguan Wan and said, "This is not the place to talk. Let's enter the city first." Seeing that Shengguan Wan could not control herself from crying, Jiang Pingji did not comfort her. She quietly waited for her to calm down. After a while, the clothes in her arms were gently pulled. She lowered her head and asked, "You're not crying anymore?" Shengguan Wan raised her hand to wipe away the tears on her face. The front of Jiang Pingji's clothes was also wet from her tears. "No, don't cry. Wanner does not cry so much." Even when she was tortured by the Zhang family, she stubbornly refused to cry. Now that she met Jiang Pingji, her tears flowed like a spring. Shengguan Wan only felt that countless eyes were on her. She could not care less about crying and blushed. "Then don't hug me anymore. Do you want me to carry you into the city?" Jiang Pingji smiled and raised her hand to rub the top of Shengguan Wan's head. As soon as she rubbed it, she realized something was wrong. She frowned and a bold guess flashed through her mind. She deliberately maintained a calm expression and asked, "Why did you cut your hair?" "Our bodies, hair, and skin are given by our parents. According to the rules, apart from a few exceptions, one's hair could only be trimmed and not cut." Shengguan Wan's face turned pale. She bit her lower lip and said, "When her husband dies, her chastity is broken." Jiang Pingji's face darkened when she heard that. Thinking of Shengguan Wan's attitude and her appearance in Xiangyang district, she vaguely guessed something. "Let's enter the city first." Her voice sank a few notches. Jiang Nongqin followed Jiang Pingji into the district headquarters, dressed in a professional attire. After a long time, "Pa Kacha," the sound of a table shattering came from the back hall. Qiguan Reng could not help but frown. After a while, his lord's suppressed anger could be heard from the back hall. Qiguan Reng was startled. Which idiot had angered his lord? Shengguan Wan felt embarrassed when she saw Jiang Pingji's anger. She spoke softly, "Sister Lanting, I'm fine." "Call me brother," Jiang Pingji emphasized. Shengguan Wan lowered her head and said, "Oh, Brother Lanting, I'm really fine." After she threw the divorce papers to the Zhangs, she gave up her womanly attire and returned to being a young girl. However, it was not easy to grow back the hair that had been lost. Even if she concealed it well, Jiang Pingji found out the problem with a touch. "I really don't know where your usual intelligence went. When your stepmother forced you, you should have thought of a way to sneak out of the house and take the token I gave you to the Lu residents to ask for help." Jiang Pingji was exasperated at her failure to live up to her expectations. She raised her hand and poked her forehead. "If my mother hadn't stopped you by chance, were you planning to commit suicide? If this place doesn't keep me, there will be another place for me. A tree dies when moved, but a man lives when moved." Suicide was the behavior of the weak. Jiang Pingji had always scoffed at it. Shengguan Wan's heart warmed. She lowered her head and said, "At that time, I didn't think of it." Speaking of which, she had been too confident. Shengguan Wan had been pampered for many years. She had never seen her stepmother as an opponent. She believed that her family would definitely stand by her side and protect her from her stepmother's bullying. Moreover, she was already engaged at that time. As long as she was out of mourning, she would be able to marry into her husband's family. Out of sight, out of mind. She would not have to look at her stepmother's sneaky smile. However, she had not expected that one miscalculation would cause her to lose everything. Having a stepmother meant having a stepfather. This saying was true. Her stepmother was also powerful. She was gentle and considerate. She was willing to be lowly and humble. She was so humble that Shengguan Wan looked down on her. She really suspected that her stepmother was from a noble family and not a brothel. However, this attitude catered to her grandmother's and father's preferences. She slowly drew away the two most important supporters of the family. Her future mother-in-law was also instigated by her and forced to break off the engagement. Shengguan Wan, a proud daughter of the heavens, became a joke. Now that he thought about it, this stepmother was quite formidable. She was like a black widow, weaving a poisonous net, and quietly waiting for the prey to fall into the net. When the prey struggled until it had no strength and was on its last breath, she would suddenly make a move, skin the prey, and swallow it into her stomach. Shang Guanwan could not help but shiver when she thought about it. Jiang Pingji sighed softly and said, "Forget it. At least you're safe and sound now." Shang Guanwan agreed. She held her hand with a smile and said timidly, "I don't have a place to stay. Wanner is currently homeless. Brother Lanting, are you willing to adopt an idler?" "No," Jiang Pingji said firmly. She did not wait for Shang Guanwan to feel sad. She said, "Good Wanner, come and help me. What do you think?" Shang Guanwan was stunned when she heard that. The bullet screen in the streaming room was overwhelming, denouncing Jiang Pingji. "Tumi Dalao, what the F *CK? Can you be more shameless? Can you be more shameless? Can you be more shameless?" Xing Dalao, "Hello everyone. I'm the host's face. She doesn't want me anymore. I feel so bad." Fengzi Dalao, "Shangguan little lowly, you've just escaped the tiger's den and stepped into the wolf's den." The audience in the streaming room felt sorry for Shang Guanwan, but due to the distance, they could only watch as the little rabbit jumped into Jiang Pingji's trap. They could imagine that when the little girl jumped into the trap, Jiang Pingji would happily bury her. She was sold by the host, and she was counting the money for the host. Shang Guanwan blinked. She did not understand what Jiang Pingji meant. "How can I help Brother Lanting?" Jiang Pingji ignored the bullet screen. "I plan to build a school and take in children of suitable age. I don't expect them to be knowledgeable, but they need to be literate and able to do arithmetic. Wanner, you can be a teacher and help teach them for a while. What do you think?" Top talents were hard to come by, but basic talents could be cultivated by oneself. They could be put to use after 2 or 3 years. Chapter 490. Shang Guanwan blushed and said softly, "How can I be a teacher with my limited knowledge?" Jiang Pingji said, "My Wanner is extremely intelligent. I'm sure you'll be able to teach her simple knowledge." But, she glanced at Jiang Nongqin, who was sitting at the side and said softly, "I prefer to be like you." Along the way to the north, Shang Guanwan had seen too many things that she had never come into contact with before. The more it was like this, the more she wanted to protect herself. Jiang Pingji could understand her thoughts, and did not force her. "It's not wrong for you to do so, but your martial arts skills are not up to par. If you go to the battlefield, it'll be extremely dangerous. How about this, you teach at the school for a period of time, and I'll arrange a martial arts master for you. When you've graduated from him, you'll be allowed to go to the battlefield." Shang Guanwan thought about it and agreed with a smile. Jiang Pingji secretly frowned and thought to herself, "I'll ask Li Yun to be stricter when the time comes. If her martial arts skills did not reach a certain level, she would not be released. What was the battlefield? She would lose her life if she was not careful." Shang Guanwan still needed time to grow. After catching up, Shang Guanwan could not help but think of the streets and houses she saw along the way. She thought about it inside. "I followed the troops all the way from Hejian to Xiangyang, so I know how chaotic the situation in the north is. Under such circumstances, the people under your rule can still live and work in peace and contentment, and the spring plowing scene is extraordinarily lively. Sigh, the people of Xiangyang are blessed to have such a good official like Brother Lanting." Jiang Pingji did not know whether to laugh or cry. "You're flattering me. My bones are going to turn soft from your flattery." She instructed the small kitchen of the district headquarters to prepare a meal for Shang Guanwan and Jiang Nongqin. The two of them did not eat anything good along the way. Usually, they barely managed to make do with a meal of cold and hard rations mixed with boiled snow water. Now that they smelled the tempting aroma of the delicacies, they did not care about their image and ate to their heart's content. Jiang Pingji went to the government office and asked someone to call Li Yun over. "I've taken you in as a disciple," she said. Li Yun was stunned and quickly shook his head. "I'm not good at martial arts. How can I be a teacher?" Jiang Pingji said, "I'm not asking you to take up the post now. We'll talk about it after we've conquered Fengyi County, Now you just have to prepare for the battle with peace of mind. Once the preparations are complete, we can go to war. As for Warner, she is a good student who is eager to learn. You can just go to the school occasionally to give her some pointers. I forgot to tell you that I gave Warner the task of being the teacher of the academy. School? Lian couldn't react in time. Qiguan Rang was stunned as well. Since when did Xiangyang district torment the school? Jiang Pingji crossed her arms in front of her chest and added, "The academy was a last-minute decision I made. I didn't have time to discuss it with you." To be precise, she had only decided to start building a school when Sheng Guanwan appeared. Qiguan Rang and Liyun were speechless. It was tiring to be a subordinate with such a master who could do whatever she wanted. Qiguan Rang knew that Jiang Pingji often stirred up trouble, but he also knew that she was not a careless person. Every move she made was carefully considered. He asked in surprise, "Why does my lord want to build a school?" Jiang Pingji turned her head and asked, "Don't you think we have too few people we can use?" Li Yin scratched his head and asked honestly, "But can't we recruit people? It's not easy to build a school, right?" Jiang Pingji secretly rolled her eyes. Other matters could be delayed, but the school was related to the long-term development of the future. How can the people we recruit be as loyal and reliable as the people we nurture? I, your lord, am alone and powerless now. I may not even be interested in the truly virtuous talents. Jiang Pingji laughed and said, "Do you know how Xiangyang district was built to its current state? Ask Wenzheng and the rest and you'll know how tired it was before the new year. If we can nurture a batch of useful people, we can save a lot of effort. Talents, no matter when it was, could never be too much." Jiang Pingji said again, "They don't have to learn well, nor do we need them to be knowledgeable. It's fine as long as they can read and do accounting." When there were enough basic talents, she planned to start nurturing elite talents. The former was time-consuming and had quick results. The latter took a long time, but it was beneficial for future development. She understood that the prosperity of a country could not do without a large number of basic talents. What's more, there was a lack of elite talents to be the brains. It was just that it was too early to think about this. She planned to take it one step at a time. Qiguan Rang immediately figured out the crux of the matter. Indeed, they did not lack top-notch talents now. They only lacked useful basic talents. Only when the foundation was solid could they build a higher building. But if they were to build a school, there would definitely be more than one room. The scale should be larger than ordinary private schools. How much would they need to invest? Suddenly, Qiguan Rang felt sorry for the poor Su Ke. If his lord really built a school, Su Ke had to make a budget. Li Yun asked, "Then, my lord, when will the school be built?" Jiang Pingji thought about it and said, "After we conquer Fengyi County." Some spies went there to investigate the situation. The Tsingyi army really do not know how to manage. They are as stupid as pigs. Not to mention that half of the population of such a large county has been lost. It is so desolate and barren that it can't even compare to a small county. To restore it to its former state, it will take at least half a year, at most a year. When Fengyi County is stabilized, we will be considered to have a firm foothold. Her current official position was only that of a district magistrate. Logically speaking, she needed the permission of the Dongqing royal family. But it did not matter. Whoever had the bigger fist had the right to speak. The district magistrate of Fengyi County could curry favor with the Tsingyi army. Naturally, he would listen to her obediently. When Feng Jin and the rest returned, Jiang Pingji specially held a barbecue party. When everyone realized that there were 2 more women at the table, they could not help but be stunned. What the hell was this? Feng Jin looked at one of them and felt that she was vaguely familiar. It was as if he had seen her somewhere before. "This is Jiang Nongqin. From now on, she will be in charge of everything in the women's camp," Jiang Pingji said. Luo Yue and Li Yun were stunned. Then, their gazes fell on Jiang Nongqin at the same time. They thought to themselves, is this Maiden Jiang? Including the female troops that Jiang Nongqin brought. The number of women's camp had already exceeded 1,200 people. With the addition of some people, they could barely be considered as a battalion and could be treated as an independent combat unit. According to the current rules, The commander of such a scale could be called a general or a captain. Their lord actually appointed a woman as a general. On the other hand, Meng Hun congratulated Jiang Nongqin. She replied with a smile. From now on, please give me more pointers, coach. Meng Hun smiled and said, I don't dare to give you pointers. Maiden, you can also take charge on your own now. Jiang Nongqin was quiet by nature. She did things in a low-key manner. Her style was down to earth. Meng Hun was very satisfied with working with her in the past. He had a very good impression of her. Jiang Pingji's gaze fell on Sheng Guanwan. She said, This is Sheng Guanwan. Before the school is built, she will be in charge of the women's department in the government office. The women's department in the government office referred to the more than 20 maidens who were subordinates in the government office. The matters they dealt with were not considered major, but the details were very complicated. They helped Su Ke and the rest to share a lot of labor. Sheng Guanwan. Chapter 491. Sensing that someone was looking at her, Sheng Guanwan looked over and realized that it was a handsome young Lang Jun. Lian secretly nodded his head, expressing his satisfaction. Such vigilance was not bad. Sheng Guanwan was secretly puzzled. Sheng Guanwan and Jiang Nongqin had already eaten a little. Initially, they thought that they should not eat too much, but when the roast meat was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside was dipped in various spices, the aroma of the food tempted their taste buds. Their mouths kept salivating. Actually, they were not that full thinking of this. They did not care about being reserved anymore. They roasted and ate when they wanted to. Brother Lanting. No, I'm calling you Lord now. These days are so comfortable. Sheng Guanwan's diet had always been a combination of meat and vegetables. She rarely only ate meat like she did now. She thought that she would get sick of the taste after eating a few more mouthfuls, but after eating 2 plates of sliced meat with those strange sauces, she could have eaten more if her stomach was not big enough. Eat your roast meat. So much can't stop your mouth. Jiang Pingji carefully flipped the meat slices on the roast plate. She raised her eyebrows slightly, and her cold voice carried some affection. Sheng Guanwan sighed and said, It's not worth it to grow up. Jiang Pingji glanced at her from the corner of her eyes and asked, What's wrong with you? Sheng Guanwan said, If I was still the same age, my lord would not have complained that I ate too much. I'm afraid you would have coaxed me to eat more. Jiang Pingji sighed and used clean chopsticks to add half a plate of meat. She said helplessly, My kindness was treated as ill intent. It's not good to eat too much meat, lest it accumulates in the stomach and becomes difficult to digest. You, on the other hand, misunderstood that my heart ached for the roast meat. You're really heartless. Here, I've roasted it for you. Looking at the interaction between Sheng Guanwan and Jiang Pingji, Qi Guanrang raised his eyebrows slightly and exchanged glances with Su Ke. They looked like they were watching a good show. Lovers. It's good to be young. Qi Guanrang lowered his voice and teased. Su Ke responded with an expression that said, We both know. Logically speaking, his lord was already 16 years old this year. However, other than his first fiancée, the current Madame Feng Jin, Wei Jingxian, he had never heard of his lord having any other female confidants. Their lord was still young, so they were not very anxious. Moreover, their lord was so protective of the fairer sex. Why would he worry about not being popular with women? On this matter, the two of them had the same idea. A man should first establish his career, and there was no hurry to get married. Speaking of marriage, Su Ke and Qi Guanrang were secretly worried about the relationship between Feng Jin and their lord. Feng Jin was the current husband of the lord's ex-fiancée. Was it really okay for the two of them to be together? The facts proved that Feng Jin was truly a benevolent gentleman. He was open-minded and did not care about those rumors. Even at last year's New Year's banquet, he was generous enough to bring his wife and children along. Now that Sheng Guanwan, who had a close relationship with their lord, had appeared, they felt that something good might be around the corner. In fact, when Qi Guanrang was sighing with emotion, Wei Xi's hand that was holding the cup trembled, and the wine spilled out. Feng Jin looked even more conflicted. It was really difficult. He guarded a secret that only a few people knew about, and watched as his teammates let their imaginations run wild. But he could not explain it. Let them speculate. It won't come true anyway. Wei Ci took out a greenish-gray handkerchief and calmly wiped the wine on his hand. If his lord was attentive to a man, he could gossip, but he was not worried about Shangguan. When Feng Jin heard Wei Ci's words, his lips curled into a smile. I think so too. The two of them looked at each other with tacit understanding and raised their cups to drink. Wei Ci's body was still weak, so the wine he drank was nourishing medicinal wine. After being unanimously approved by several physicians, it could slowly drive away the cold. Jingxian is also in Xiangyang. Changsheng, who was born last year, can talk and walk now. Do you want to go and take a look? Shangguan's eyes lit up when she heard that. Of course I have to go. I haven't seen Sister Jingxian for a long time. When they saw Wei Jingxian, the two of them naturally sighed and talked to each other about their encounters over the years. When she learned that Shangguan finally got rid of Madame Zhang, Wei Jingxian could not help but feel happy for her. In the previous letter, Shangguan told Wei Jingxian that she was going to marry a dead man. The man's betrothal gift also came with a copy of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. Her future mother-in-law even humiliated her in public, asking Shangguan to study the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women and curb her dirty habits before marriage. At that time, Wei Jingxian felt extremely angry. She was the legitimate daughter of the Shangguan family and was born into a noble aristocratic family. How could she tolerate being humiliated and belittled by such a shrew? However, every family had their own difficulties. At that time, Wei Jingxian was still with Feng Jin as a hostage in Shangjing and could not even protect herself. The only thing she could do was to comfort Shangguan. She could not really help her. Wei Jingxian hugged Changsheng. It's all right now. I don't have to worry anymore. Shangguan sighed. Yes, she used to be Shangguan of the Shangguan family. Now, Shangguan is just Shangguan. Aunt. Recently, Changsheng liked to remember people. Whenever she caught one, she would repeat it over and over again. Shangguan looked at Changsheng and could not help but have a bold idea. Is Sister Jingxian taking care of little Changsheng at home now? Wei Jingxian was stunned. Yes, Changsheng is still young and doesn't like to stick to wet nurses or maids. Changsheng was young and had a bad temper. The servants really could not control her, so she could only raise her by her side. Sister Jingxian, have you ever thought of finding a job? Wei Jingxian was stumped by the question. She looked at Shangguan in confusion. Wonder, why are you suddenly asking this? Shangguan could not tell why. She just felt that Wei Jingxian was also familiar with the classics and historical collections in her boudoir, and knew the morals of saints. In terms of talent, she was not as talented as someone like Feng Jin, but she was much better than those illiterate fools. It was just that it was too much of a waste to be trapped in a small inner courtyard. Because of her own experience, Shangguan always lacked a sense of security. In the past, she felt that it was enough for a noble lady of an aristocratic family to fulfill her responsibilities. Now, she felt that such a life was a little dangerous. She deliberated for a while and told her the truth. Wei Jingxian did not show an angry expression. Instead, she seemed to be thinking about it. Wei Jingxian sighed. Everyone has their own way of living. Changsheng is still young. I can't stop worrying about her. At night, before the couple went to bed, Wei Jingxian told Feng Jin about this. Feng Jin was about to take off his clothes, but he stopped halfway and said, When Changsheng is a little older, you can give it a try. Wei Jingxian was surprised. It was as if she did not know her husband. Chapter 492. A world far vaster than the inner court? Wei Jingxian only felt as if a piece of gravel had fallen into the lake of her heart with a plop, causing ripples that slowly spread. Her nose suddenly felt a little sour, but she teased him with a smile. Aren't you afraid that I'll be too busy with work and neglect you and Changsheng? Feng Jin smiled faintly. If that's the case, won't you have more time to pay attention to me and Changsheng? Wei Jingxian blushed and spat softly. She said angrily, We've been married for a few years. How are you old? Feng Jin laughed involuntarily. We've only been married for a few years. How am I old? The couple was deeply affectionate and went to bed peacefully. The next day, Feng Jin went to the government office to report for work in high spirits. Jiang Pengji had a bun in her mouth. When she saw Feng Jin come over, she smiled and teased him. Tsk tisk, it's rare for Huayu to oversleep. Feng Jin did not want to be outdone. He replied, it's rare for my lord to be so diligent. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and said shamelessly, you're wrong. Your lord has always been so diligent. If not for his upbringing, he really wanted to roll his eyes at her. Doesn't this person's conscience hurt when she says this shamelessly? His lord had always been a hands-off boss. Except for some documents that she had to approve, everything else was thrown to her subordinates. She was extremely capricious. If one wanted to meet her in the government office, one would either be extremely lucky that day, or she would be bored. Jiang Pengji yawned and continued to be in a deadlock with the piles of documents. Why is my lord so diligent today? After Feng Jin sat down, he asked Wei Ci. Although Wei Ci did not seem to be in good health, he was always the first to arrive every day. His work efficiency was also admirable. She has never liked to read these literary things. Wei Ci laughed involuntarily. I'm afraid my lord has had enough of such peaceful days. She can't wait to send troops to Fengyi County. He did not dare to say that he knew this woman very well, but he still understood some of her temperament. Although comfort was something people yearned for, it would lead to laziness after a long time. And this woman hated laziness the most. He said helplessly, but the troops brought by Maiden Jiang and the original soldiers need time to get used to each other. The 2,000 troops that Jiang Nongqin brought were not rookies. They were definitely one of the main forces to attack Fengyi. He was worried that his side would be at a disadvantage if he rashly dragged them to the battlefield before they had gotten used to each other. Wei Ci said with a natural expression, so, isn't my lord looking for something to do because she's bored? On one side, Jiang Pengji was sharpening her sword to attack the Tsingyi army in Fengyi County. On the other side of the battlefield, there was already a stalemate. In the south, Prince Changshuo's expression became increasingly ugly. In spring, he raised his troops to besiege Qinzhou in the name of purging the emperor's evil followers. He thought that he would be unstoppable, but the result was unexpected. Qinzhou, which he had expected to be easily taken down, was actually a hard bone to chew. He thought he could easily take over Qinzhou and force the emperor to abdicate. He didn't expect that not only would Qinzhou's troops be blocked at the border of Qinzhou, but a few battlefields would also put him under great pressure. After 3 days, they had lost a total of 5,000 soldiers. That Colonel Huang must have received guidance from an expert. He's quite skilled in the art of war. If we want to take him down, I'm afraid we'll have to increase the number of troops. The strategist in the tent carefully read the information sent by the spy. His brows relaxed slightly, but then he frowned a little, as if he was very troubled. They didn't know which expert was guiding them, but they were always one step ahead of them in guessing their intentions. They rarely fought head-on, and mainly used sneak attacks and harassment. They worked hard to play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses, which seriously hindered the pace of Prince Changshuo's attack. Prince Changshuo brought hundreds of thousands of troops to besiege Qinzhou. Every day, he had to spend a huge amount of rations. After a winter, he thought that Qinzhou had run out of ammunition and rations. He thought that they could take over Qinzhou with minimal losses and become the ruler of Dongqing. He would be crowned the emperor. But reality gave Prince Changshuo a hard slap in the face. Not only was Qinzhou not weak, but it was even on par with them. He wanted to take over Qinzhou in one go after spring, but he didn't expect to stumble. Haha, what Colonel Huang? He's just the son of a eunuch. Prince Changshuo curled his lips in disdain. Colonel Huang, Huang Song, was Secretary Huang's godson. Huang Song was originally the patrol of Shangjing. During the earthquake in Shangjing last year, he immediately led the patrol troops to rescue many important ministers and their relatives. Even if these people despised Huang Song's background, they couldn't help but praise him for saving their lives. With this help, Huang Song's official career became bright. Later, he even became the colonel of the Imperial Guards, who was in charge of 5,000 troops. When Prince Changshuo attacked Qinzhou, Huang Song volunteered to fight. The emperor was very happy and had a higher opinion of him. Therefore, the battlefield on the left side of Chenzhou was led by Huang Song. It was also the most difficult part to deal with so far. Although Prince Changshuo's troops were much more than Huang Song's, after a few battles, Prince Changshuo's side lost more than 5,000 troops. Even if Prince Changshuo had some results in the middle and right sides, compared to the losses on the left side, he was still at a disadvantage. The strategist sighed and said, "A hero doesn't care about his background. Even if you don't like to hear it, this Huang Song is indeed worthy of your attention." Prince Changshuo's face darkened. A look of disgust flashed across his face. "Do you have a way to get rid of this fellow?" The strategist's expression didn't change, but he already felt some disgust in his heart. Previously, Prince Changshuo had humiliated him in front of a battalion commander. Now he was bossy and bossy. Without the slightest bit of respect, he secretly spat. Prince Changshuo hadn't ascended the throne yet, but he already couldn't wait to tear off the facade of a wise ruler, who was respectful to the wise. That was what he thought in his heart, but he didn't dare to continue angering Prince Changshuo. If it's a head-on battle, and he has the guidance of an expert behind him, Colonel Huang won't be easy to deal with. The strategist raised his brows. He already had a vicious plan in his heart. His tone was cold and harsh. But it's not difficult to transfer him away from the battlefield. Prince Changshuo paused and said, "As long as he's transferred away, it'll be easy to deal with Huang Song after we conquer Chenzhou. Just tell me what your plan is. If it's feasible, send someone to do it now." The strategist endured the restlessness and disgust in his heart and said calmly, "There's no need to trouble others. You only need my lord to write a sincere solicitation letter and promise as many benefits as you can." Prince Changshuo didn't understand. Could a verbal promise coax Huang Song over? The strategist thought to himself that he had a pig-like lord. His brain was so slow that it couldn't work. It's not to rope Huang Song in. It's just to make the emperor fear Huang Song and even want to kill him. The strategist said concisely, in case Prince Changshuo didn't understand. The emperor is extremely suspicious. Huang Song's reputation in the army is rising day by day. If there's news that my lord wants to recruit Huang Song, even if the emperor doesn't kill Huang Song, he won't let him stay at the front line. As for Huang Song, the strategist paused and swallowed the rest of his words. This Huang Song wasn't an ordinary person. Was he blindly loyal to the emperor and unchanging? Or did he run away with his men when he saw the situation wasn't good? Chapter 493. Bang! Huang Song punched the table heavily. His expression was ferocious and full of anger. He threw a roll of bamboo slips filled with words on the ground. Feng Zhu was still outside the tent when he heard the heavy thud inside. The soldiers guarding the tent saluted him, then lifted the tent flap to let him pass. "Bogeo, what happened? Why are you so angry?" When Feng Zhu entered the tent, he noticed that the table was cracked by Huang Song. Doubts arose in his heart, and he asked Huang Song with concern, "Just now, I sent a messenger to summon Zhu, saying that you have an urgent matter." Feng Zhu's gentle voice brought Huang Song back to his senses. He took a deep breath and tried hard to suppress the surging violence in his heart. Huang Song pointed at the scattered roll of bamboo slips on the ground. There was a murderous look in his eyes, as if he was staring at the enemy who killed his father. "Huaijia, look at the letter on the ground. Prince Changshuo is a traitor. He's so arrogant that he's out of control." When he opened his mouth, his voice was slightly hoarse because of his anger. He sounded more tired than usual. Feng Zhu squatted down slightly and picked up the roll of bamboo slips. Then, he opened it with both hands and read it with a frown. His composure was much better than Huang Song's. Even though the contents made his heart skip a beat, he still maintained a calm expression. He said with certainty, "Although this move of Prince Changshuo's looks ordinary, it's indeed a vicious plan. He's trying to kill you, Bogeo." Huang Song was not a fool like Prince Changshuo. When he received the roll of bamboo slips lying in his tent, he realized that the situation was bad. Even his scalp could not help but feel numb. An unprecedented sense of crisis rushed to his head. He hurriedly called Feng Zhu over to think of a solution. Feng Ju sat at the lower seat and placed the roll of bamboo slips aside, as if it was some kind of scourge. Although the handwriting on it was gentle and harmless, the content inside could be said to be a deadly poisonous snake. One bite would be the end of one's life. Prince Changsho and the current emperor are blood brothers. These two are more suspicious than the other. Feng Ju's lips curled into a mocking smile. He had long looked down on the royal family. Although Prince Changsho sent this letter to recruit you, Bogeo won't believe that you're sincere, even if he takes advantage of the situation to get close to you. Therefore, the original intention of this letter is most likely to drive a wedge between Bogeo and His Majesty, attempting to kill with a borrowed knife. It wasn't entirely a bad habit for those in power to be overly suspicious, but to be overly suspicious to the extent of being overly suspicious would only bring about harm. Unfortunately, the current emperor and Prince Changsho both had this temperament. He clearly knew that this letter was a ploy by Prince Changsho to frame him, but when this news reached the palace, Huang Song's official career would come to an end. Losing his position was a small matter, but he was afraid that his entire family would lose their lives. Ever since the earthquake in Shangjing, the emperor issued an edict to move the capital to Qinzhou. Prince Changsho forged an edict to leave his fief with troops and horses, besieging Qinzhou for an entire winter. The emperor became more and more paranoid every day. Even the slightest movement could irritate his sensitive nerves. So far, it was unknown how many upright officials and loyal officials had been mistakenly killed by the emperor. The imperial court was even more jittery. Today in Qinzhou, the emperor used the power in his hands to kill anyone who made him feel unhappy, or displeased. How long had he been in Qinzhou? Not to say that blood had flowed like a river, but the killings had already made everyone tremble with fear, and everyone was in danger. The aristocratic families and celebrities in Qinzhou didn't dare to meddle in the affairs of the imperial court, didn't dare to talk about the people's livelihood, didn't dare to delve into the ways of governance, and didn't dare to propose to strengthen the army and enrich the people. These things were even ridiculed by the public as vulgar things. They only dared to talk about romance at elegant gatherings and poetry gatherings. Feng Ju felt helpless and heartache at such a jittery atmosphere. His dissatisfaction with the emperor had already gone through the roof. None of the three sons of the Feng family were simple. Feng Ju could see that once this chatting atmosphere spread, it would harm the country. Even if everyone knew that Prince Changsho's actions were to frame Huang Song, according to the emperor's suspicious character, he would never trust Huang Song. If the emperor still had a trace of rationality, he would most likely strip Huang Song of his military power, transfer him away from the front line, and grant him an idle position. However, according to Feng Ju's judgment of the emperor, he was afraid that he would not be so merciful. He would rather wrongly kill 10,000 loyal officials and generals than miss a traitor who might betray him. The royal family was merciless, and brothers fought against each other. Prince Changsho and the emperor, the two brothers, could even fight against each other, let alone Huang Song, a descendant of a eunuch who had nothing to do with the emperor. Huang Song's face was pale, as if all the blood had drained from his face. He sat in the distance, dispirited, and his eyes flickered with a complicated look. Feng Ju sighed and said to Huang Song, "What does Bogeo plan to do now?" If he did not do anything to protect himself, when the news of Prince Changsho recruiting Huang Song with generous promises reached the emperor's ears, it would provoke the emperor's suspicious nerves. By then, even if Huang Song had a godfather to put in a good word for him by the emperor's side, his situation would still be precarious. Huang Song held his head dispiritedly and said rather uncomfortably, I don't know how to dispel the emperor's suspicions." Up until now, Huang Song still had expectations for Dongqing. He hoped to be a loyal official who could turn the tide and benefit the people. However, Huang Song was not a foolishly loyal person. If the emperor really wanted to kill him, he would not foolishly stand on the spot and wait for misfortune to befall him. Feng Ju sighed and said, "It's too difficult to dispel suspicions. Even if you manage to escape today, if Bogeo loses the battle just a little, It's hard to guarantee that the emperor won't suspect that you are in cahoots with Prince Changsho. When that time comes, you really won't be able to escape. The battlefield was ever-changing, and no one could guarantee that they would win. Prince Changsho's plan was simple but extremely vicious. It directly broke the advantage that Huang Song had accumulated with great difficulty. After hearing Feng Zhu's words, even if Huang Song was unwilling to believe it, he felt a little guilty when he thought of the emperor's current state. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He said, "Huaijie, you have to save me." These days, it was not easy to be a loyal and patriotic person. Even if Huang Song wanted to save the country and the people, reality did not allow him to. He might even face the situation of being beheaded. Feng Zhu lowered his eyes and thought for a while. He said decisively, "The plan now is to cut off my tail to survive." "Cut off my tail to survive," Huang Song muttered. Feng Zhu knew what Huang Song was thinking. Until now, he had not completely dispelled his expectations for Dongqing. Since that was the case, he had to give it a push. He said, "Yes, this is the only plan that can preserve our strength. Bogeo, write a letter and secretly deliver it to His Majesty. Explain the details of this matter, and reprimand Prince Changsho for his wild ambition and intention to sow discord between you and the emperor. Finally, retreat in order to advance. Resign from your position as colonel and temporarily leave the front line. Don't touch these sensitive positions for the time being." After hearing that, Huang Song thought for a while in a daze. He was still hesitant, and unresigned emotions filled his heart. He hated Prince Changsho to the core. This vicious plan was too King sinister. Chapter 494. Huang Song was not a fool. He could understand the hidden meaning in Feng Zhu's words. However, he was really unwilling to give up. Ever since he was young, he knew how lowly his identity as the descendant of a eunuch was. The people he wanted to make friends with looked down on him, while the people he looked down on wanted to cling to him. The desire to be recognized was deep in his bones. How could he be respected and recognized by everyone? The only way was to become a capable minister and a pillar of the country. At present, Huang Song was still working hard towards this goal. Borrowing the east wind of the earthquake to save people, he skyrocketed and became the young talent that the emperor valued the most. At a young age, he was already a colonel, but the cruel reality did not give him the chance to advance further. Should he choose to continue to be loyal to the emperor and love his country, or should he choose to save his and his family's lives? Feng Zhu had given him the best advice. Now it was up to Huang Song to choose. After a while, Huang Song asked Feng Zhu in a hoarse voice with only a glimmer of hope, "What if I write a letter to secretly inform His Majesty, pretend to agree to Prince Changsho's invitation, and secretly find a plan to trick Prince Changsho? What do you think?" Feng Zhu's expression was cold. It was a big blow to Huang Song. First of all, Prince Changsho will not believe that you are sincere in defecting. Even if he believes, he will always be on guard against you. Moreover, he has many strategists under him. Maybe he will use this as a breakthrough point to tear apart the defense line in Qinzhou. By then, you won't be able to explain yourself. Feng Zhu took a breath and continued. Moreover, His Majesty is narrow-minded and suspicious. Do you think he will believe that you are pretending to defect to Prince Changsho? If you tell him this, I'm afraid he will suspect that you have the intention to rebel. The whole family will be implicated. After he finished speaking, he looked at Huang Song calmly, waiting for him to completely wake up. Now, the north of Dongqing had fallen into a chaotic war. The people had no way to live. In the south, Prince Changsho and the emperor were fighting as equals. In the end, no matter who won or lost, the world was already in chaos. Only a saint could turn the tide. Was Huang Song a saint? He was not. Therefore, he could only do the simplest thing, self-preservation. He thought of ways to increase his strength and fight for a place in the chaotic world. Only then could he protect the people under his rule and plot more things. The current Huang Song was still too tender and weak. He needed to be more ruthless. After a while, Huang Song's pained and struggling face calmed down. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made up his mind. Song understands. I will write a letter to inform His Majesty. retreat in order to advance, and find a place to settle down. Huaijie, it's been hard on you. Huangsang's choice was within Fengju's expectations. Compared to his ambition to stabilize the country, Huangsang valued his own life more. Now that he was forced to a dead end by Prince Changshuo's evil scheme, Huangsang naturally had to think of a way to escape and seek revenge in the future. Where there is life, there is hope. Making up his mind, Huangsang wrote a secret letter and sent it to the royal palace. It reached the emperor's desk almost at the same time as another secret letter. The current emperor seemed to be suffering from schizophrenia. When facing imperial consort Huijun, he would speak gently and meticulously, but when facing others, he would fly into a rage. If he was unhappy, he might draw his sword and kill someone, causing everyone to feel threatened. The aristocrats did not dare to talk about politics. Originally, there were still some courtiers who were rather critical of imperial consort Huijun's appearance in the front hall. Now they were afraid that without her, the danger level would soar. If imperial consort Huijun was here, even if the emperor was furious, he would just throw something and keep a straight face. He would suffer some grievances, but his life would not be in danger. If imperial consort Huijun was not here, then he would have to be careful. It was definitely the blessing of the ancestors to be able to walk out of the front hall unscathed. Today, imperial consort Huijun said that she was not feeling well and did not accompany the emperor. His personal attendant was trembling at the side as he served the emperor. After reading one of the secret letters, the emperor was furious. He swept away the booklets that were piled up like a mountain on the table with his sleeves. The nerves on his face were faintly twitching, as if he was in extreme pain. The emperor held his head, suppressing the splitting headache. At the same time, he was panting like a bull. The onlookers were frightened and did not dare to approach him. Just as the attendant was hesitating whether to secretly send someone to seek help from imperial consort Huijun, the emperor picked up another secret letter. His action of opening the secret letter was unusually rough. When he opened the secret letter and read it, his tightly furrowed brows relaxed slightly. His eyes flickered with a strange flickering light. The first secret letter was a secret agent reporting that Prince Changshuo had secretly solicited Huangsang. Huangsang and his trusted aides had discussed in detail in the tent for a long time. The second secret letter was written by Huangsang. He spoke frankly about Prince Changshuo's wild ambition. He intended to use such despicable actions to sow discord between the emperor and his officials. He sincerely expressed his loyalty, and then excused himself by saying that he was not feeling well and might not be able to share the emperor's burden at the front line. If the emperor felt that he could be of great use, it would be better to transfer him to a more remote place in the rear and continue to shine for the emperor. If not for the timely arrival of the second secret letter, the emperor was afraid that he would have ordered the secret agent and his trusted aide to secretly eliminate Huangsang. However, even if this secret letter came in time, the emperor still disliked Huangsang. He could not help but suspect whether Huangsang had accepted the generous treatment given by Prince Changshuo, and whether he was not loyal to him. He wanted to find a reason to remove all of Huangsang's positions. Now that Huangsang knew his place and asked to leave the front line, the emperor was not so disgusted and suspicious. After thinking about it, he picked up his brush and wrote an imperial edict. He quickly sent it to the front line to recall Huangsang. He did not want others to think that he was heartless. Now that Huangsang had taken the initiative to give him a way out, he took the opportunity to do so. After writing this imperial edict, he wrote another appointment letter appointing Huangsang as the district magistrate of Diang District in Maota County of Haozhou. Because of his suspicions and Huangsang's young age, he did not give Huangsang a high official title. He only gave him the position of a district magistrate of a rather barren and remote small county. If Huangsang did well, he would promote him in the future. Haozhou was one of the 21 counties in Dongqing's Liuzhou. It was the poorest and weakest place among the 6 states. Among them, Maota County was considered a relatively prosperous place in Haozhou. Diang District in Maota County was the best place among them. It was also considered the emperor's alternative compensation. All of this was within Fengju's expectations. He helped Huang Song find a place to settle down by taking a step back. When the 2 imperial edicts were passed to Huang Song, Jiang Pingji was already eager to lead the troops into battle. Although Xiangyang district was not large, the troops that could be mobilized were as high as 10,000. All of them had been ruthlessly trained. Although they were far from the elite troops, in Jiang Pingji's mind, they were far better than the troops, who were as wild as dogs and betrayed their comrades. Jiang Pingji despised them in various ways, but the others were already satisfied. They had great expectations for this army. Xiangyang district was Jiang Pingji's base camp. She wanted to conquer the entire territory of Fengyi County. Naturally, it was impossible for her to take away all her assets. Chapter 495. On this day, the wind was blowing and the clouds were scudding. The flags were fluttering in the wind. Jiang Pingji was finally going to leave the small Xiangyang district and embark on a wider and crueler stage. The troops stood in a neat formation below the drill ground. Each of them stood ramrod straight and looked straight ahead, waiting for the start of the oath-taking ceremony. For this expedition, 2,000 veteran soldiers and 2,000 new recruits were left to guard Xiangyang district. The other 3,000 elite soldiers and new recruits were sent to the battlefield. Originally, Jiang Pingji wanted to use a risky and radical method to let the new recruits stay in Xiangyang district. Her original troops and imperial guards, as well as a portion of the newly recruited recruits, would participate in the war. However, this proposal was unanimously opposed by all her subordinates. Wei Xi said, "My lord, this plan must not be carried out. Xiangyang district is a shelter that my lord has passed through. If the new recruits are stationed there, they lack experience. If the enemy takes the opportunity to launch a sneak attack, I'm afraid there will be unforeseen events. To be safe, it's better to keep some experienced veteran soldiers." After he finished speaking, he frowned. He secretly had a headache over her old temper. But he couldn't really watch her take the risk and be radical. Thinking back to her previous life, the only time she suffered a loss in the hands of Qiguan Rang was when she was too happy and almost got ambushed by Qiguan Rang from behind. That time, they suffered heavy losses. Almost everyone thought that she would tear Qiguan Rang into pieces, but the result was unexpected. Not only did Qiguan Rang, who surrendered, not die, he even became her closest confidant. She protected Qiguan Rang, the strategist who surrendered voluntarily. From the beginning to the founding of the country to her death, she even gave the new emperor a warning. It was impossible for Wei Xi to say that he didn't mind it at all. Returning to his prime, Wei Xi understood this person from a different perspective. He slowly understood why Qiguan Rang received special treatment from her. It was simply because Qiguan Rang saw through the feelings beneath her ruthless appearance. Everyone said that Emperor Chen was cold and heartless, bloody and bloodthirsty, temperamental, and dictatorial. But was it really so? If she was such a person, how could the Jiang dynasty be established so steadily? Under her rule for decades, the people lived and worked in peace and contentment. The troops worshipped and admired her. Even when she strongly advocated for women to enter the court and implemented various laws that were beneficial to women but detrimental to the interests of the aristocratic families, even though she encountered obstacles, it was still implemented smoothly in the end. Why had no one ever thought of rebelling against her rule and starting a new dynasty? Just because what she did was indeed for the sake of the vast majority of the people, but the minority of people who lost their interests controlled the right to speak. She was also a person who disdained fame, so she let those clowns who thought they were important jump up and down. However, humans were not saints. Too many people were influenced by the thoughts of others. But Qiguan Rang saw the truth. That's why His Majesty said, "Qiguan Wenzheng is the only one who understands me in life. He is probably not enough." Being reborn, standing by her side and following her from the very beginning, Wei Xi really saw a completely different Lu Shi. This kind of emperor made him even more infatuated and adored, but that was all. He did not dare to casually profane the slightest bit. A monarch and a minister for a lifetime. It was a good ending. After some thought, Wei Xi chose an excuse that would move her, but would not provoke her to deliberately go against him. The others did the same. They had different reasons, but the core idea was the same. You can surf, but you can't be too surf. Jiang Pingji's face turned slightly green, and she clicked her tongue. In fact, she originally wanted to pull everyone out. She wanted to launch a blitzkrieg and quickly conquer the entire Fengyi County. She wanted to be a nameless but powerful county chief of Fengyi County. But she could not dissuade her subordinates. Qiguan Rang raised his eyelids and said, "After all, new soldiers are new soldiers. They lack training and combat experience. If the two armies fight, they will definitely be the ones who suffer the most losses. It's not easy to train soldiers, so it's better to bring a batch over. The rest will stay and guard the city." It was a good thing that the Lord wanted to fight, because none of the current troops were conservative. But the problem was that the Lord was unconventional. She was so reckless every day. If she was not careful, she would lose everything. Being a subordinate's heart was too agitated. Jiang Pingji clicked her tongue. "Alright, I agree." She looked at the crowd with a doting expression, as if she was looking at a group of wooden sticks. "These people are so timid. I'll listen to you little princesses' decisions. Is that okay?" Jiang Pingji was dressed in military attire. She read aloud the punitive expedition against the Tsingyi army that Feng Jin had written. She didn't care about this kind of empty thing at all. She recited it in cadence while secretly rolling her eyes in her heart. She was there to snatch the Tsingyi army's territory. If she won, the territory would belong to her. Why would she have so many tricks? Why did she have to carry out justice on behalf of heaven and save the people of Fengyi County, who were in dire straits? Was it necessary to beautify herself as an angel? Facts proved that it was really necessary. The phrase "there is a justifiable reason" was not just for show. Even though she was sick of it, Jiang Pingji would not act willfully and recklessly. A nameless teacher had always been criticized by others. Even if Feng Jin was not the gunman, she would force him to write a voluminous punitive essay of a few hundred words to belittle the ancestors of the Tsingyi army to hell. She used the punitive essay to stimulate the morale of the troops. Next, she mobilized the troops. "Meng Hun, step forward," she shouted loudly. A burly man in his prime walked out from the troops below. He held a long knife in his hand and half-knelt before Jiang Pingji on the stage. "Your subordinate is here. I appoint you as the captain of the vanguard battalion," Jiang Pingji said. "Do you have the confidence to sweep away the enemy and clear the obstacles for our army?" "Your subordinate will not let you down, my lord," Meng Hun answered loudly. The silence of the drill ground was filled with a murderous aura. "Li Yin, step forward." Jiang Pingji's gaze fell on Li Yin. She had high hopes for this young man. However, Li Yin was too young, and his battle experience was not as experienced as Meng Hun's. He could not lead an army on his own, so he followed Meng Hun to gain experience in the vanguard battalion. "Li Yin greets my lord." Without his usual adorable, naive look, the stone-faced Li Yin was like a completely different person. Every step he took was sonorous and forceful, as if every movement contained a powerful explosive force. Although he could use the silver spear in his hand to take the enemy's head, he was still able to take the enemy's head. "I appoint you as the deputy captain of the vanguard battalion. You will raise the prestige of our army together with Captain Meng." The vanguard battalion was responsible for the task of scouting the path for the entire army. It was to investigate the enemy's situation and examine the terrain. They could either investigate or launch probing attacks to disrupt the enemy's formation and deployment. It could also boost their morale. Usually, the vanguard battalion was made up of the most elite troops. If there was any mistake, it would definitely cause a huge loss to the army's morale. Meng Hun sought stability, and Li Yin was spirited. They were an excellent combination. She appointed Qiguan Rang as the advisor of the vanguard battalion. His style of trickery was very suitable for the vanguard battalion. Even if they were ambushed, they could turn danger into safety. Jiang Pingji and Wei Xiai guarded the center of the army. Su Ke controlled the rear. Finally, Chapter 496. Jiang Nongqin. Why does this name sound like a woman's? Many soldiers were secretly suspicious. On the other hand, The elite soldiers brought by Jiang Nongqin straightened their waists one by one. The muscles on their backs tightened slightly, and they were like a tightened spring. They could not help but notice Jiang Nongqin, who stood out from the crowd in the corner. She did not wear men's clothing. She only wore clothes that were convenient for her to move around. It was different from men's clothing, but it could be seen that it was a woman's clothing. She was covered in leather armor, and her long hair was curled up to the top of her head. With a cold face, she walked out from the line with firm steps and knelt on one knee. "Your subordinate Jiang Nongqin greets you, my lord." Jiang Nongqin looked very feminine. Even though her skin looked rough after being exposed to the sun for a long time in training, her facial features could not hide the fact that she was a woman. Moreover, her figure did not look like that of a man. Now that she opened her mouth, her voice was slightly hoarse, but it was obviously a woman's voice. It further confirmed this point. It was actually a woman. Most of the soldiers widened their eyes in surprise. Even though they knew that the female battalion was not to be trifled with, they never thought that a woman could go on the general selection stage. Was this a joke? Fortunately, they remembered the instructions during training. Even though they were extremely surprised, they still maintained discipline and did not whisper to each other. The scene made Jiang Pingji's mood better. Even her voice sounded a little lighter. "I appoint you as the commandant of the female battalion to assist the vanguard battalion." The size of the female battalion was close to 1,500 people. It could barely be considered a battalion. However, she did not bring the entire female battalion with her this time. She only brought 500 people. Every one of them had the most outstanding performance in the female battalion. They had seen blood on the battlefield and gained combat experience. Although it was only a commandant of 500 people, it looked a little embarrassing. Everyone did not even know the specific tasks of the female battalion. However, the fact that Jiang Nongqin was a woman, that she went on the general selection stage, and that she was appointed as a commandant was enough to stun everyone. They could only suppress their dissatisfaction. The new recruits did not dare to criticize Jiang Nongqin, nor did they dare to question her strength. The best proof was that she had the ability to go on the general selection stage. They still wanted to tremble when they thought of the female soldier, who challenged all the new recruits. As for the veterans, they were disciplined. Even if they were dissatisfied, they did not dare to bring it up on such a serious occasion. Therefore, Jiang Nongqin was given the rank of a captain. The 500 women in the female battalion were only a short distance behind the vanguard battalion when they marched. The pressure of marching was great, but these young ladies were all selected from nearly 1,500 people. Every quota was snatched from the hands of their comrades. Naturally, they did not dare to be negligent, nor did they dare to miss this good opportunity to train. Sooner or later, they would have to go to the battlefield. The Tsingy army was just a motley crew. They had also gone through a winter of fatigue and hunger. Their numbers sounded large, but their combat power was rather weak. In addition, they had been dealing with the Red Lotus group for a long time, and their military strength had been greatly depleted. The knowledgeable female soldiers analyzed the pros and cons of this battle, and came to the conclusion that if they wanted to accumulate as much experience as possible, they had to participate in this battle. The Tsingy army was only the beginning. In the future, there would be stronger enemies, more dangerous battlefields, and battles with higher mortality rates. As members of the female army camp in Xiangyang district, they would have to take this step sooner or later. It was better to accumulate experience from less dangerous battles, putting oneself in a hopeless situation and coming back to life. Jiang Pingji looked around and looked at everyone with disdain. Her voice was hoarse, but there was no lack of fierceness. It made everyone tense up and their hair stood on end. Let's go to war. From the beginning of autumn to the end of winter last year, Gu Xian's worthless glass tea set had swindled several large sums of wealth from the northern borderline. He had exchanged a large amount of sheepskin and horses of medium quality at a low price. Jiang Pingji had also taken the opportunity to mix a lot of rice bought from the shopping center into the food that Gu Xian had brought. Now, Xiangyang district could be said to have a strong army and sufficient provisions. Not to mention fighting a siege battle that they were sure to win. Even if there were a few encounters on a narrow road, they could still withstand it. Half a year had passed. Xiangyang district relied on those few colts to form their own cavalry troop. There were not many people in the cavalry battalion. There were only about 600 people. After all, not everyone was suitable to fight on horseback. The total investment to nurture a cavalry troop was not a small amount. The cavalry was mainly used to charge, break up, and cut the enemy's formation. It had a great role and status in ancient wars. Considering that the cavalry battalion was still immature, and its role in a siege battle was not that strong, Jiang Pengji did not bring out this precious troop. Raising a cavalry troop really made one's flesh ache. Even a rich landlord like Jiang Pengji felt heartache. The strong wind blew and the flags fluttered. Xiangyang district slowly shrunk behind them and became a dot on the horizon. Jiang Pengji rode on White, who was so excited that it wanted to gallop. She followed them at a moderate pace. Wei Xi's face was pale from the wind. Seeing that his lips had lost their color, Jiang Pengji said, "I asked you to guard the city, but you insisted on changing places with Huayu. Don't force yourself to die if you're not in good health." The original plan was for Feng Jin to accompany her to battle. Wei Xi, who was not in good health, would stay at the headquarters to look after the city. However, the other party took the initiative to volunteer. He said that Feng Jin wanted to take care of his family. As a single dog, it was not a problem for him to go anywhere. Jiang Pengji glanced at Feng Jin, and then at Wei Xi. She thought that the two of them would fight. Who knew that Feng Jin only glanced at Wei Xi leisurely? Wei Xi also looked at him meaningfully. She did not know what they communicated through their eyes, but the two of them reached a consensus. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She did not understand literati like you who had complicated thoughts. Anyway, the final result was Wei Xi's victory. Feng Jin stayed in Xiangyang district to look after the city. After that, she heard Qiguan Rang complain about Wei Xi's treachery, and that he was evil. Why? There are so many things to do in the district headquarters. If we really leave Wei Xi behind, I reckon that he will not be far from death by the time we return from the expedition. Feng Jin, who was left behind to look after the city, faced with such heavy work. Could he really squeeze out time to enjoy family time with his wife and daughter? It was very risky. Jiang Pengji was speechless. What he said made sense. She actually had nothing to say. After nightfall, the whole army rested on the spot. They were not allowed to whisper to each other during the march, so the soldiers had been holding it in for a whole day. Taking advantage of the break between meals, they talked at once about Jiang Nongqin, the unprecedented female officer. How can marching and fighting a war be child's play? How can they let a woman, who is not a camp prostitute, sneak into the military camp? Under the repeated orders from the district headquarters, everyone knew that the female battalion did not do such improper work. None of the soldiers dared to provoke them. Then go and challenge the other party. If you win, you might be able to replace her. Bah, you have bad intentions. If I can win, I would have been a centurion long ago. Why would I still be here talking nonsense with you? They really did not dare to question Jiang Nongqin face to face. They were also clear about the training situation of the female battalion. Even the men might not be able to withstand it, but they persevered one by one. Just this point alone was enough to win their respect. However, there was still a long way to go before they acknowledged the female battalion as their comrade. The soldier sneered. "Centurion? Why don't you become a corporal first?" After marching for 4 days, they were only half a day's journey away from their destination. Jiang Pengji ordered the military camp to rest for a day. Chapter 497. The sky was already dark. Thick, dark clouds came from all directions and piled up densely. They gathered together and shrouded the sky. Looking up, it looked like an overturned black wok had covered the earth. The howling wind blew through the bushes, bringing with it a muddy fragrance that was unique to the soil. It had rained heavily a few days ago. The bumpy ground was filled with mud that had yet to evaporate. Report. There are signs of marching ahead. It's suspected to be the enemy. Several scouts reported one by one. Meng Hun's expression was solemn. Beside him, Li Yun's eyes were cold. Have we been exposed? Meng Hun frowned and snorted. It might not be that we've been exposed. It could be that the enemy has other plans. Go and investigate again. One by one the scouts were sent out. News came back one by one. Meng Hun and Li Yun's expressions gradually relaxed. According to our judgment, the marching traces were left half a day ago. Looking at this route, they shouldn't have discovered us. Meng Hun rode on the horse. After a few days of marching, he did not have time to wash up. He looked a little rough. The wrinkles between his brows formed a few deep marks. Li Yun's situation was slightly better than Meng Hun's. He was still fresh meat. Even if he was rougher, it would only make him more tasteful. Now that he was the vice-captain of the vanguard, Li Yun became cold and stern. The Tsingyi army doesn't have a complete supply source. They can only rely on plundering the local people to maintain their military expenses. Li Yun's eyes shone with a fanatical desire to fight. If this was really the Tsingyi army's latest supply, then they were extremely lucky. They were destined to have a good start. He stuck out his tongue and licked his dry lips. We still don't know the situation in Chang'an district. But the supply has always been the lifeline of the army. If we cut off the Tsingyi army's supply to Chang'an district, we can take it down even if we besiege it. There were 4 counties in Fengyi County. They were Xiangyang district, which was owned by Jiangpingji, Chang'an district, Malan district, and Jiaoping district that were occupied by the Tsingyi army. Xiangyang district was the most remote among the 4 counties, but it had the largest area. Chang'an district was the most prosperous. The geographical location of Chang'an district was rather special. It could be attacked or defended. It had always been the center of Fengyi County. Due to various reasons, it was the first place that the Tsingyi army had their eyes on. Now it had become one of their main camps. It was estimated that there were more than 20,000 Tsingyi army members there. Although they did not know the specific situation of the Tsingyi army, according to the reports of the spies, the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus Group had been at odds for a whole winter. They were extremely short of resources in all aspects. If they intercepted their rations and supplies now, it would be extremely convenient for the middle troops to attack. Hearing this suggestion, Meng Hun was also tempted. Now that he was the captain of the vanguard battalion, it was up to him to decide whether to pursue or attack. The vanguard battalion was responsible for scouting the path for the entire army. Not only did they have to investigate the enemy's terrain, but they also had to pay attention to the enemy's movements and disrupt their deployment. If the situation allowed it, they had to engage the enemy's vanguard troops and reap the greatest harvest. Now that they have discovered the Tsingyi army's supply team, if they do not seize the opportunity and wait for the supplies to be transported to Anqing district, it will only cause more trouble. The Tsingyi army would get the supplies. Their morale would be maintained at a higher level. It would be disadvantageous for them to fight a war of attrition and delay for the Tsingyi army's reinforcements. If his lord led her troops to the city walls, and the Tsingyi army received this batch of provisions, their morale would be maintained at a relatively high level. If they continued to fight a war of attrition with them, and delay time for the Tsingyi army's reinforcements, it would be disadvantageous to his side. Without the supplies, the Tsingyi army would be exhausted. They would be besieged for a few days, and their morale would plummet. Without morale, it would be easier to attack the city. Meng Hun believed in the siege weapons that his lord had created, and he also hoped that they would produce an unexpected result in the first battle. However, it was inevitable that there would be sacrifices during the siege, and it was also a good thing to reduce the number of casualties. Soon he made a decision: chase. At the same time, he sent a scout to pass the order to the main army. Although the vanguard could go anywhere, they could not go with the flow. If they were completely cut off from the main army, they would be like an earthworm with its body cut off. Both ends would be short. If they encountered the enemy and could not take care of both ends, they would cry. It was proven that Meng Hun was more reliable and conservative than Jiang Pingji. If Jiang Pingji was in charge of the vanguard, she would go wherever she wanted. Wherever the enemy was, she would point her blade at them. She would bite them no matter how small they were. She would kill one if she saw one, kill two if she saw two. As for what the main army was, it was none of her business. She would deal with the enemy when they came. Therefore, Wei Xiai could not understand how such an unrestrained person became one of the world's hegemons. It was not until his old master was killed, and he joined Jiang Pingji's camp, that he found out the mystery. The vanguard was a bunch of mad dogs. The main army and logistics were also a bunch of warmongers. If they wanted to launch a sneak attack, they might fall into the enemy's trap. Later, they got a few strategists to be their nannies. The situation was much better. However, the strategists were hardworking nannies. The generals were still mad dogs that ran everywhere. The people at the front fought and expanded their gains. The nannies at the back cleaned up the mess. It was like an old lady holding a milk bottle and trying hard to call for her grandson to drink milk. The naughty grandson always had an expression that said, "I don't want to listen to you." What could they do? They were also very desperate. Wei Xiai could not help but pity Jiang Pingji's previous team of civil officials. Oh, the team of civil officials in this lifetime seemed to be equally pitiful. He secretly glanced at Jiang Pingji. When she heard the news from the scouts, she indeed revealed a look of pity and envy. My lord needs to take command of the main army. She can't be moved easily. Wei Xiai reminded her leisurely, as if he was reciting the band-tightening incantation. I haven't said anything yet. Jiang Pingji ordered the scout who came to report the news to leave. She turned her head and rolled her eyes at Wei Xiai. Lao Siji Lianming. Yes, the streamer didn't say anything, but the look in your eyes clearly betrayed your thoughts. Tiancheng. Ha ha ha, the streamer looked envious just now. Her heart suddenly softened. Yuepao Dubai. To let the warmonger obediently take command of the main army. These literati are really scary. Chu Yuebiao. I believe that the streamer is not someone who can be held back easily. She can't lead the vanguard, but she can take the initiative to attack the city. Are any of you like me looking forward to the streamer taking the lead to kill the enemy's general when she calls for battle? Wei Xiai was too annoying. He touched a sore spot. However, the eyes of him and the audience in the streaming room were as bright as snow. Wei Xiai said, My lord wants to lead the vanguard, but it's impossible. If the lord were to lead the vanguard, Wei Xiai was really not confident that he could lead the main army to find her position. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, How do you know it's impossible if you don't try? Chapter 498. Jiang Pingji glanced at him and said angrily, If I'm not willful just because you say I'm not willful, then I'll lose face. Wei Xiai was startled. He didn't seem to know how to continue. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If the time the two of them fought, and the days they spent together after that, Wei Xiai had known her for almost 30 years. He didn't know that she had such a childish side. It seemed that she had to be coaxed. If it was in the past, he probably wouldn't have dared to speak like that. Naturally, he wouldn't have seen such a rare side of her. Wei Xi's gaze softened a little. It was like a spring with ripples, shining with a cold glimmer. Jiang Pingji made a sound of surprise and rubbed her arms. Can you stop looking at me like that? You're giving me goosebumps. I don't have the hobbies of men. What if I'm misunderstood? Besides, with your small physique, don't covet me. Wei Xi's gentle expression froze slightly. His jade-like face turned a little green. He was no longer as warm as before and was as cold as ice. He seemed to be calm and said, Don't misunderstand, my lord. Jiang Pingji responded with an, Oh, and continued to ride on the horse's back to look at the unfolding great universal geographical map. The audience in the streaming room mocked her mercilessly. The army had been marching for many days, and there wasn't much entertainment. Jiang Pingji relied on the bullet screen to kill time. Hua Shiki Yu Piao. Trash streamer, you're bullying my little CICI again. 360 degrees Kwang Kong fan. Obviously, CI Marin's gaze was so gentle just now, but it was interrupted by the streamer. An unromantic guy like you is destined to live with your own hands for the rest of your life. Okay? A single dog for life. Thomas Jianxian de Fuan. Streamer, let's hold hands. Whoever gets rid of his singlehood first is a dog. If he can get rid of his singlehood, he'll be a dog. Who wants to hold hands with you? Sigh. I feel that when Bao Bao and Ci Marin have 3 to 5 children, the streamer will still be a single dog. Meng Hu Luodi Shikiyu Piao. Bah, the one above. Have you asked for my opinion before you King want to have children with my husband? Ci Marin Zaiwo Xia. The one above. Have you asked for the first wife's opinion? Samiran Zaiwobi. Did the mistresses above ask for my opinion? Jiang Pingji looked at the bullet screen that was full of insults. She took a deep look at Wei Ci. His beauty was deceiving. Even if they were separated by a plane, a group of men and women would still fight for him until their heads bled. Sai Zixiao. Jiang Pingji suddenly sighed with emotion. For the sake of the happiness of all the people in the world, you really don't want to consider getting married and settling down early? A married handsome man was better than an unmarried handsome man. He wouldn't attract so many girls and butterflies. Wei Ci's originally unsightly face seemed to be covered with a layer of green rouge. Even the look in his eyes changed. He said coldly, "Mercy doesn't like women." Jiang Pingji followed his advice and said, "Then just marry a male wife. At least there'll be someone to warm your bed at night." Thinking of Wei Ci's physique that was afraid of the cold, he should find a hot partner. "No need, I don't like men either." Wei Ci said with a fake smile. It was a little difficult for him to speak. Jiang Pingji listened and looked at his face. Then, she slowly moved her gaze downward and stared at a certain spot. "Do you need to get a famous doctor to take a look?" Women with a severe cold body would easily become weak and sickly. It would be difficult for them to give birth, and they might even become completely infertile. Similarly, men with a cold body would be weak and sickly. Would it affect the normal work of a certain organ? Impotent at a young age, and without a nightlife, it would be easy to have a psychological disorder after holding it in for a long time. Wei Ci's expression was completely unsightly. He started to deeply doubt whether he was blind in his previous life. Why did he only see the cold and aloof side of Her Majesty, but not her unreliable and indecent side? Sure enough, it was hard to see the big picture. He really had to go back and wash his eyes and polish them. Jiang Pingji happily teased Wei Ci until his face turned pale. Meng Hun, who was on the other side, was overjoyed. He thought it was just a small troop transporting provisions. He never expected it to be the Tsingyi army transporting provisions. Not only were there provisions, but there were also chests of gold, silver, and jewelry. Those things could not even be stuffed in the chests. When the lids were opened, it was estimated that there were 5 wagons. Oh my, it really made people envious. Many of the soldiers who used to be bandits couldn't wait to get into action and kill them. On the other hand, Meng Hun was more interested in the wagons of military supplies. If he could take them down, it would definitely be a great achievement. However, this was not the most eye-catching thing. In the middle of the troop transporting provisions, there were hundreds of women in ragged clothes. Many of them were barefooted, and their faces were numb. Their wrists were tied up with a long hemp rope and strung together to prevent them from escaping. Li Yin hid beside Meng Hun and lowered his voice. "Looking at the direction in which they are marching, could it be that they have robbed a rich district?" It's hard to say. Although the majority of the Tsingyi army are people who are suffering, their behavior after they release their wild nature is even uglier and more disgusting than the imperial court. At most, the imperial court doesn't care about the lives and deaths of the people. But these Tsingyi army are unscrupulous and will not last long. Li Yin had always had a low opinion of the Tsingyi army. Now that he saw those women tied up on a rope like animals, whipped at every turn, and insulted with vulgar language, it was really unbearable for him. His determined eyes were filled with murderous intent. It's a chaotic world now. Meng Hun's heart was filled with bitterness. The butcher's knife of an animal is often not waved at its enemies, but at the weak women, the immobile elderly, and young children. If one takes a closer look, one can see that there are many greenish-gray heads hanging on the wagons of military supplies. There are men, women, the elderly, and children. This style is not like the people of Dongqing. It's more like the animals of the northern borderline and the southern barbarians. Li Yin was raised by his master Xie. When Xie taught him spear techniques, he would also tell him stories about the outside world. The northern borderline, and the southern barbarians were undeveloped places. Even if Xie Qian did not have any personal feelings, Li Yin could still feel the bloody cruelty. The old skinny man's words are called Rao Bahua. The woman's name is not envious sheep. The children call it bone rot. And the same eyes are two-legged sheep. These were the crimes committed by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline and the 4 factions of Nanman. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline have been eyeing Dongqing covetously all these years. Now that Dongqing is in chaos, how can they not be tempted? As for the Nanxing kingdom, that was destroyed by the 4 factions of Nanman, the situation was even more tragic. Let's not talk about the numerous crimes committed along the way. After Nanxing's capital was breached, all the male members of the royal family were beheaded and hung on the city wall. All the women were forced to be prostitutes in the camp. The youngest was 3 to 5 years old, and the oldest was 50 to 60 years old. They were not spared. The 4 factions of Nanman even issued a massacre order in order to vent their anger at not being able to conquer the capital. They allowed the soldiers to kill in the capital for a day and a night. If this was not shocking, what about the 4 factions of Nanman that gathered people to eat? Capture people and eat them. Kill thousands every day. Pound and grind the stockade into hundreds of huge mounds. Take people alive and crush them in the mortar. Chapter 499. Meng Hun laughed coldly. Whether it's the north borderline, Nanman or Dongqing, they are all the same. It's not surprising that they do the same dirty things. Li Yin was silent. He did not dare to respond to Meng Hun's words. Even during the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms, the people of the Central Plains had an innate sense of superiority. This sense of superiority reached its peak after Xia ended the chaotic times and unified the world. How could the people of the Heavenly Kingdom be mentioned in the same breath as the barbarians? If Meng Hun's words were heard by the old pedants and scholars, he would definitely be condemned and reviled by the people. In the eyes of the people, the barbarians were barbarians. They ate raw meat and drank blood, lacked intelligence, and were cruel savages. On the other hand, the people of the 5 kingdoms of the Central Plains were refined and courteous. Whether it was Dongqing, Nanxing, Zhongzhou, Beiyuan, or Xichang, who looked down on the barbarians. However, Meng Hun said that people were all the same. The people of the Central Plains could also do the bloody methods of the barbarians. They just did not admit it. Such a statement was really deviant. Li Yin subconsciously wanted to refute, but the bloody reality below made him unable to speak. His heart was tangled and uncomfortable. In the end, he could only sigh. Based on Li Yun's intelligence, he could not understand whether it was the rebellious people who created the chaotic times, or the chaotic times that drove the rebellious people crazy. Why are you sighing? It's really bad luck. Meng Hun's face was stern. His eyes stared at the Tsingyi army, who were preparing to rest on the spot. He lectured in a low voice. As a general, you must not show your emotions on your face. You can't let the situation of the war affect your mood. To the captain of the vanguard battalion, he had to maintain a calm mind and clear thoughts at all times. He could not make any mistakes. The soldiers of the vanguard battalion made up half of the elites of the army. If they lost the war, not only would their morale plummet, their combat power would also be greatly reduced. As the commander of the vanguard battalion, the captain had to play the role of the backbone at all times. Even if the situation was bad, he could not easily reveal dejection or sigh. This would affect morale, even if Li Yun did not mean it. Li Yun smiled honestly, revealing the naive and sweet temperament that Meng Hun was familiar with. However, he quickly realized something and quickly tightened his face. On the other side, the Tsingyi army's troop that was transporting provisions had already found a shady and cool place to rest. The weather is still very cold, but the laborers use up a lot of energy to transport rations over mountains and rivers. They are always sweating profusely. On the other hand, the members of the Tsingyi army who are supervising wear light clothes and are simply dressed. They are panting more heavily than the laborers who are pushing the rations. One of them sat down on the wagon and fanned himself with the hem of his robe. His slightly swollen face was somewhat unkind. I'm so unlucky. If it weren't for these women walking slowly, we would have arrived long ago. We would have been able to eat and drink well. Why would we need to waste time in this wilderness? A thick phlegm surged up his throat. He spat directly on the face of the woman closest to him. Seeing her scream in panic, he felt much better. I really don't understand these women. My children have already eaten, but they still lack a mouthful of phlegm. The other man leaned against the wagon, grabbed the head hanging from the back of his waist, pulled it off and threw it far away. Don't go overboard. These women are to be shared with the brothers. I'll let you enjoy them in advance on the road, but don't break them. Since you've eaten the meat, you should let others have some soup. His gaze swept across the hundreds of women with disheveled hair, lowered heads, and shivered. He laughed wickedly, reminiscing something. Women's bodies are so soft, and they taste good. Chaotic times have their advantages. If the world was at peace, how could they have such comfortable days today? They risked their lives to be mountain men who work in the fields. They don't know how long they have to wait to taste women. There are few women. In remote villages, it is impossible to marry a woman. It is common for a few brothers to raise money and buy a wife together. There are about 1,000 members of the Tsingy army guarding the rations team. Pairs of eyes lingered on the women. During this period of time, they hastened to transport the rations. The women are by their side, but they can't touch them. Only a few people of high status can casually drag one to the bushes to do it. Many people can't bear it anymore. However, due to the officer's prestige, no one dared to act rashly. Look at your useless faces. When we go back, all the brothers will have a share. One by one, there's no hurry. Ha ha ha. Those women seemed to have been tortured to the point of numbness. Apart from a few who revealed resentful gazes, the rest all had lifeless faces. How could they not be numb? Their villages and homes were destroyed in a day. Their fathers and brothers died tragically in front of them. Not only did their bodies suffer a blow, but their minds were on the verge of collapse. If this was just an appetizer, what happened every day on the road was like a blunt knife, cutting their fragile nerves. If these beasts wanted to eat meat, they would be the best and freshest meat. They watched helplessly as people who were originally alive were chopped, washed, cut, and thrown into the pot to be cooked. There were even a few who were more stubborn who were cooked alive. What kind of feeling was that? They were either made to sit between two vats and fire was forced from the outside, or they were roasted on an iron frame, or their hands and feet were tied and first splashed with boiling water. Human flesh is said to think of meat. Eating it makes people think of it. Those who had the courage bit their tongues to commit suicide. Those who had no courage could only endure it bitterly. They trembled with fear, afraid that they would be the next victim. In comparison, the silver humiliation every night was nothing. They wanted to escape, but they had no shoes. There were many gravel in the surrounding terrain. Both their hands were tied to the same hemp rope. It was impossible for them to escape alone. Seeing that they were getting closer and closer to Anqing district, everyone's hearts surged with waves of despair. Some people even felt relieved. If they died like this, it would be good. Come to think of it, even hell wouldn't be so unbearable. A portion of the vanguard battalion hid in a secret place. The improved crossbows were already loaded. The crosshairs were aimed at the heads of the Tsingy army. Chief, why do I feel that the weather today is chilly? Someone felt a little uncomfortable. Another person said, look at these heads. Who doesn't feel cold? Cowards. There was a burst of laughter around them. Before joining the Tsingy army, many of them were diligent farmers. However, after tasting impudence, they could no longer return to their original state. They could no longer find that simplicity. They wantonly ridiculed their cowardly comrades and roared with laughter. All right, if you've rested enough, all of you get up. Send this batch of food to the city, then enjoy the beauty together. Before the leader's voice died away, blood suddenly spurted out from between his eyebrows. An arrowhead was revealed. Many members of the Tsingy army were about to bend over and get up or pick up the weapons at the side. They were at their most relaxed state. A wave of sneak attack killed 200 to 300 members of the Tsingy army. Fortunately, Meng Hun and the rest took a roundabout route to the back of the Tsingy army. Otherwise, their tracks would have been discovered by the other party. Enemy attack. There's an enemy. After a wave of attacks, corpses fell to the ground. Only then did the Tsing army react. The crowd was already in complete chaos. At that moment, more than 1,000 people rushed out from the originally empty bushes in the forest. The leader was Li Yun. He was about to attack with a silver spear. When he rushed forward, he realized that his target's head had already been pierced through. Li Yun was speechless. Chapter 500. Ever since he came to Xiangyang district, Li Yun had been wondering if he was out of practice. First, his lord snatched the bandit leader's head. He thought it was bearable. After all, she was his lord and he couldn't afford to offend her. Now that his head was snatched by someone else, Li Yun expressed that he couldn't bear it. When he skillfully retrieved his silver spear, he saw clearly who snatched his head. In a split second, Li Yun was speechless. Jiang Nongqin, the captain of the female battalion. Her rank was even higher than his. Just as he retrieved his silver spear, his nerves tensed. He brandished his spear and deflected the attack. Suddenly, the spear had pierced through two people. Blood washed the silver spear. A streak of silver light streaked across the sky. The king of hell had already mercilessly taken 2 lives. Li Yun's gaze involuntarily fell on Jiang Nongqin. He didn't even see clearly when she dashed in front of him and made the first move. Now that he fixed his eyes on her, he felt that Meng Hun's words were right. This woman really shouldn't be provoked. If most of the soldiers used force to break through tricks and coordinated with their comrades to attack, defend or attack, Jiang Nongqin was a lone ranger. She didn't need the cooperation of others. She slid into the enemy's camp alone. It was fine if she didn't make a move, but once she did, it would be a life. Almost every move she made was aimed at the lifeline. 2 long and short knives of different lengths in her hands were like a judge's pen. Every time she made a move, she would mercilessly cross off a person's name. In terms of ferocity, her performance wasn't inferior to Meng Hun or Li Yun. Compared to Meng Hun's bold moves and Li Yun's exquisite skills, Jiang Nongqin's every move was made to kill. When blood splattered on her face, she didn't even frown. In just a few breaths' time, she had already taken 3 steps forward. There were 5 corpses lying by her feet. She didn't seem like a general at all. She was more like a killer. This was what Li Yun felt. In close combat, she had the upper hand. Li Yun didn't have time to think. The surrounding enemies had already surrounded him. They slowly formed an effective attack. After the initial shock, the members of the Tsing army reacted one after another. They picked up their weapons and wanted to counterattack. Some of them were despicable and shameless. They even grabbed a woman and made her stand in front of them in a panic. They hid behind her and took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Li Yun did not make a move because he was benevolent. However, in the blink of an eye, the woman who was used as a shield had already died in Jiang Nongqin's hands. Her expression was still as cold as a wooden sculpture. The member of the Tsing army, who used the woman as a shield, did not have time to react. In just a short while, a knife had already pierced his neck from one end to the other. He thought that Jiang Nongqin would take pity on him because of her identity as a woman, or even be restrained. However, her actions had shattered Li Yun's understanding. Unbeknownst to her, Jiang Nongqin's worldview, values were already infinitely aligned with Jiang Pingji's. There was no difference between men and women on the battlefield, and women could not be forgiven or treated worse because of their gender. Only those who survived and those who died. If she was restrained because the Tsing army used a woman as a shield and caused the loss of her comrades, it would not only be unfair to her comrades, but it would also cause other members of the Tsing army to follow suit. More women would be captured as shields. This was a vicious cycle. However, in a flash, Jiang Nongqin first killed the innocent shield. Then she killed the man who used a woman as a shield. Jiang Nongqin, who was slaughtering on the battlefield, was calm to the point of cold-bloodedness. Such a thought flashed in Li Yun's mind. The long spear in his hand flicked away the enemy's sword, sword and halberd. With lightning speed, he performed the phoenix nod. The shadow of the spear brought forth a silver shadow. A circular spear mark appeared on the enemy's throat. Fresh blood spurted out from the bloody hole. In terms of spear skills, other than Liyun's master, who could teach him how to be a man, it would be difficult for others to win. Moreover, Liyun had been through many bloody battles. When he attacked, he had an indomitable aura. However, he could control it at will. Even if someone closed in on him, he was not afraid to fight. 1 inch longer, 1 inch stronger, 1 inch shorter, 1 inch riskier. On the battlefield, people like Jiang Nongqin, who fought with close-range weapons, were at a disadvantage. However, her attack speed and body movements were rather outstanding. It was not easy for the motley crew of the Tsingyi army to hurt her. The people from the female camp were not as tyrannical as Jiang Nongqin, but their performance was remarkable. They fought in groups of 2 or 3, and worked together to besiege one person. However, they had only trained for a short period of time. Their psychological qualities were not up to standard. It was inevitable that they would have stage fright in the face of such a bloody scene. One of the female soldiers was careless, and the Tsingyi army got close to her. She raised her huge spear high and was about to land on her head. Ah! The female soldier thought she was dead, but she heard the other party's cries of pain. She opened her eyes in a panic, and saw that the Tsingyi army soldier had 2 bloody holes in her eyes. Her partner's fingers were holding 2 suspicious blood-colored balls. The male soldiers in the chaotic battle did not notice the abnormality over here. However, there were still 300 vanguard soldiers hiding in the dark, launching a sneak attack. Just now, when they were about to provide support, they saw with their own eyes that another female soldier dug out the other party's eyes. Damn it! The soldiers who saw this scene were so frightened that their hands trembled. They almost shot the crossbow. The female camp was really not to be provoked. Digging out the eyes of a man without saying a word. Even a man would not be so ruthless. Why are you in a daze? Her partner's shout made the female soldier return to her senses. Her body had already reacted 1 step ahead of her mind. She pulled out the dagger from her waist. While the Tsingyi army soldier was bending over and howling in pain, she stabbed the back of the other party's neck with the dagger. There were not many Tsingyi army soldiers. The laborers who transported the rations were long scared out of their wits. They had all escaped during the first round of shooting. Those women could not leave, because they were tied up with hemp ropes. How could the Tsingyi army be a match for the vanguard battalion? In fact, the vanguard battalion had not killed many people. The ladies of the female camp had experienced the initial fear. One by one, they pounced on their next target with ferocious expressions. Perhaps they were not strong enough, but they cooperated well. None of them survived. As the saying goes, pick the soft persimmon and pinch it. Realizing that some of the people who ambushed them were women, the Tsingyi army planned to use the female camp as the key point to break out of the encirclement. However, when they really rushed over, they realized that these young ladies were much more ruthless than the men. The women who were weak and easily bullied in their eyes were extremely fierce. The long spears in their hands were modified. They were not the usual ones that were more than 10 feet long. They were only 2 heads taller than them. Their weight was also much lighter, so it was convenient for them to wield them. Poof, poof, poof. The sound of the spearhead piercing into the flesh rose and fell. The female soldiers even shouted and pushed the spearhead a little deeper, piercing the other party's stomach. Killing would make people fearful, but it would also make people feel high. The female camp obviously belonged to the latter. They had abandoned their fear of death and their obsession to survive. Almost everyone showed a side that was frightening. Among the 500 people, half of them came from Hejian County. The other half were recruited from Xiangyang District. Chapter 501. Many people were so shocked that they were speechless. They thought to themselves, "Oh my God, have these girls been provoked by someone?" No one expected these women to have such a terrifying side. That ruthlessness was like stabbing the enemy who killed their father. No, if the fathers of these female soldiers had been killed, they might not have been so ruthless. After all, everyone knew the background of the women in the female camp. They were all abandoned by their families. Their lives at home were not satisfactory, and they were even tortured. However, they quickly overturned this judgment. Compared to these female soldiers, the reaction of the women who were surrounded was more terrifying. They just used their weapons to cut the hemp ropes that bound the women's wrists. The originally lifeless woman roared like a wild beast and pounced on the ground. She lifted the stones on the ground with both hands, and before anyone could react, she raised them up high and smashed them down with a bang. Clang, clang, clang. Every hit used all the strength in her body. The hard skulls were smashed open. Brain juice mixed with blood and broken bones flowed all over the ground. The splashed filth splashed on her face, but she didn't feel it. She fiercely gritted her teeth. Her expression was ferocious, and her eyes were about to split open. This was like a signal, and also like a button. It unleashed the most resentful and wildest side of many women. Some even pounced on the bodies of the Tsingyi army. They opened their mouths and bit their necks, noses, chests. Blood mixed with flesh was bitten off. As the scene became more chaotic, more and more women vented their anger on the corpses of the Tsingyi army. They almost lost control. The soldiers were shocked by this unforeseen event. Some of their throats kept squirming, and they subconsciously took a step back. Officer Meng, aren't you going to stop them? Lian saw these people's actions, and faintly felt a chill run down his spine. These women's outburst of madness made even him tremble. Some of the corpses of the Tsingyi army were even smashed into a pool of blood and flesh. They still had no intention of giving up. 2 women even snatched the long spears from the female soldiers. They held the spears tightly with both hands, and kept stabbing the corpses of the Tsingyi army, who had already breathed their last. Fresh blood flowed out from the holes of the sieve-like corpses. Even the veteran soldiers who were used to seeing bloodshed could not bear to look at it. Meng Hun looked at the women's reactions, and was silent for a while. He raised his hand to stop Li Yun. When one's emotions were suppressed too much, there were usually 2 situations. Either he would become a cripple and his life would be over, or he would completely explode and change his temperament. This batch of women who were held captive and abused by the Tsingyi army, a small portion of them had been tortured to the point of losing their sanity, while the rest were as deranged as lunatics. The best way was to give them an outlet to vent their anger. It's fine, let them continue to vent. Let's go pack up the supply carts. We can't stay here for long. If this batch of rations did not arrive in Qingan district, it was hard to guarantee that the Tsingyi army would not send people to check and provide support. Li Yun was stunned. He looked at the deranged women, and only found his voice after a while. But what about these women? If all of them were to stay where they were, there were jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards in the mountains. Not far away in Qingan district, there was also the Tsingyi army. Meng Hun stopped in his tracks and said helplessly, "We are the vanguard, we can't take them with us." Li Yun understood this logic. After all, he had to look at the bigger picture. Meng Hun sighed and said, "It's less than half a day's journey from here to Qingan district. They will be safe once our lord has conquered Qingan district. If the main army met them, perhaps they could take them in for a while. But they were the vanguard, they could not take these people with them." Jiang Nongqin used a cloth torn from the corpses of the Tsingyi army to wipe her blood-covered blade, while walking towards the 2 of them. She said in a hoarse voice, "I asked the troops to inform these women to hide in a safe place, as soon as possible, and wait for news from Qingan district. The Tsingyi army has been waiting for rations for a long time. If these women still stay here, they will inevitably be implicated." At that moment, the troops had already started to clean up the battlefield. Those who were not injured pushed the supply carts away, while those who were injured received the care of the female soldiers. The male soldier who accepted her bandage could not help but tremble. Fear was clearly written on his face. "Why are you trembling?" A female soldier had a fierce look on her face. Her face and neck were covered in the enemy's blood. It was already very scary. But now she deliberately pulled a long face and looked fierce. Since when did women become so scary? The troops were very careful even when they swallowed. They were afraid that their movements would make the other party unhappy. Not only did the female soldiers carry weapons, but they also carried a small bag of items to treat wounds. It was used to clean the filth from the wound and clean and bandage it. This was also a compulsory item in the first aid course. Almost every female soldier was forced to learn it. At least, they had to master theoretical knowledge. Because there was no goal of hands-on experiments when they were learning, they only had theoretical knowledge, but no practical experience. Fortunately, there was no lack of practice targets on the battlefield. It was not a fatal wound, but it was a little rough when treating the wounds. Some of the troops were in so much pain that they grimaced in pain. They wanted to scold them in rage, but the ruthless look of the female soldiers when they killed flashed in front of their eyes. They could only swallow their anger aggrievedly. Damn, is such a fierce woman still a woman? Because there was support from the crossbowmen in the dark, there were no deaths or losses in the surprise attack. Many people were injured, but it was not fatal. After transporting the supply carts away, the vanguard did not deal with the corpses of the Tsingy army. Instead, they left them exposed in the wild to be eaten by wild beasts. Those women vented their anger ferociously. They only woke up after they were exhausted and regained their senses. One by one, they stared at the soldiers of the vanguard with vicious and guarded gazes. However, the soldiers did not pay attention to them. Instead, they pushed the supply carts away without looking sideways. The rules of the military camp were very strict. None of them dared to challenge it. Not to mention that there were 2 lieutenants and a deputy lieutenant watching, who dared to commit a crime against the law. Another reason was that they were really frightened by the female soldiers. For a while, they were traumatized by women. Quickly leave this place. Escape to the mountains and hide for a few days. The Tsingy army may send troops out of the city to receive the supply carts. If they discover your traces and see the corpses on the ground, the Tsingy army bastards will not let you off. In less than half a day, Chungan district would probably receive news of the sneak attack on the supply carts. One must know that previously, the cooks who transported the rations abandoned the rations and ran in all directions. This news could not be hidden for long. The female soldiers conveyed the message of the female battalion's lieutenant, Jiang Nongqin. The malice and guard in those women's eyes did not decrease. When they saw that this group of people really did not care about them, and those men did not even look at them, some of them could not help it. Can you bring us along? Please save our lives. Although they survived, they were abandoned in the wilderness. Surrounding them were only the Tsingy army, who had died beyond recognition. After all, they were still afraid. Previously, they were not afraid because they were dominated by hatred. Now that their emotions had calmed down, their weak side prevailed again. No. Chapter 502. The woman was confused by the female soldier's quick reply and blurted out subconsciously, "Why not? The one in front of them was also a woman. Why couldn't she bring them along?" The female soldier said, "Marching to war isn't child's play. Find a place to hide and wait for the news from Chungan district." Many of the women were at a loss, as if they didn't know what to do in the future. There were also a few more shrewish women, who were very afraid of the female soldier's cold and uncaring attitude. They wanted to hold on to the last piece of driftwood, and spoke without thinking. "Why didn't you save us? Are you afraid that we'll steal your men, and that's why you're talking nonsense?" If it was any other time, if they really met such women, they might have pounced on them and torn their mouths apart. Although the people in the mountains were simple, it didn't mean that they weren't stupid and savage. This kind of savage was often used against the weak. Most of the female soldiers were between 13 and 15 years old. In this era, this age was enough to be engaged and find a family. However, most of them were unmarried and had no immunity to those dirty words. How could they compare to the real shrewish shrews? The female soldier's face turned red and green, as if some bad memories had been evoked. Wasn't the female battalion initially misunderstood as a brothel? When her family sent her over, they looked at her as if she was a person who had contracted a disease. When they pushed her into the fire pit, they couldn't wait to get away from her, as if being a camp prostitute was her fault. Now that the female battalions had gained their reputation, and this surprise attack had displayed the combat strength of the female battalions, presumably, no male soldiers would dare to look down on the female soldiers of the female battalions. However, their moods were not even a little brighter, and they were actually pointed at and ridiculed. Who could stand it? The female soldier held a long spear, the red tassel on the spearhead dripping with uncoagulated human blood. She glared coldly at the person who spoke. She snorted and turned to leave. She had already conveyed the message. If these women lost their lives because they didn't listen to the advice, they couldn't care less. After the woman finished speaking, the more she thought about it, the more reasonable she felt. Just as she was about to argue, the female soldier threw her a disdainful look, turned around and left. Left. From the beginning to the end, she didn't even look at her. The female soldier had only taken a few steps when the woman behind her sat on the ground. She stretched out her legs and slapped her thighs with both hands. Her face was crying, and her mouth was muttering curses. She cursed the Tsingy army for being heartless, cursed herself for having a tough life, and cursed God for being unfair. Have you conveyed the message? Some of the women's battalion stayed behind to retreat. Jiang Nongqin was one of them. The female soldier said, "I've already brought them here, but I don't know if they'll listen." Jiang Nongqin's face was cold, and her tone was flat. Everyone has their own fate. If they die here, so be it. In today's world, the least valuable thing is human life. Those who want to save themselves can still be saved, but those who want others to save them are doomed to be hopeless. Marching to war meant that one's head was tied to one's belt. The soldiers couldn't even take care of themselves, so where would they find the time to deal with these things? Didn't they see that the Tsingy army that was escorting the rations was completely annihilated? Not a single one was left alive. Apart from the fact that the women were too ruthless, and those women killed the defenseless Tsingy army, there was another reason. Captives were not needed at all times. Once they became captives, their lives could be ended at any time. Sometimes, in order to speed up the army, the captives would be a burden. The merciful ones would be given a quick death, while the cruel ones would be buried alive. What's more, if there was a shortage of rations, the captives would even be slaughtered and made into dried meat to satisfy their hunger. The Lord was rich, but it wasn't to the extent of making dried meat. However, if the captives were a burden, Jiang Nongqin wouldn't be merciful. Captives could be used as free labor. What about these women? Apart from being a burden, they would only be a burden. Anyway, they had already been extremely benevolent. If the other party couldn't think it through, they could only wait for death. Jiang Nongqin retracted her gaze and said calmly, "Let's go and catch up with the troops in front." Yes. After everyone left, those women looked at each other blankly. Some of the smarter ones had already thought of finding a place to hide to avoid suspicion. Those who were immersed in their own thoughts were crying, making a scene and cursing dirty things. Occasionally, they would even involve the soldiers in the women's camp. In short, they had never thought that the women soldiers were decent soldiers, and not prostitutes who used their beauty to serve men. Naturally, there were some who were tortured by the Tsingy army to the point where they were like walking corpses. They simply didn't care about what was happening in the outside world. Those who deserved to die, someone sneered coldly and said in a peculiar tone, "You're not good looking, why would they like you? Even when you're cooking and eating, you're complaining that you're dirty. When those beasts were suppressing you, weren't you fawning over this and that? I didn't see you hate them so much then." The woman who spoke had reason to hate the woman who was making a scene. Many women came from the same village. Those beasts from the Tsingy army were suppressing her. In order to protect herself, she blurted out that she was hiding in the cellar. She pointed out the hiding places of many women, just to gain some benefits from the Tsingy army. What a stupid woman, her intestines were completely black. If she hadn't done that, a few women in the village could have escaped. It was all because of this rotten black widow. Some could not bear the humiliation and committed suicide. Some were humiliated to death. Some gritted their teeth and were bullied by beasts one after another. There were also people who had their limbs chopped off and the flesh on their chests cut off. They were thrown into the pot to cook meat soup. Why didn't such a woman die? That woman was like a fur on her tail that had been stepped on. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws and pounced on her, wanting to tear her face. However, she didn't succeed. Her face was hit by a flying stone. A hole was immediately formed on her forehead and blood flowed out. She cried and howled. Tears and mucus flowed down her face. Before the village was in trouble, this woman loved to gossip. She made up stories about women from different families having affairs with other men. Her mouth was full of obscenities, and she even caused people to die. She clearly knew that the butcher at the village entrance was petty and very possessive of his wife. However, she still talked nonsense everywhere. She said that the butcher's wife was fooling around with the village's ruffians at home. She made it sound so real. That young wife was unable to defend herself. She was beaten to death by the jealous butcher. Only then did the talkative woman shut up in embarrassment. Chapter 503. On the other side, the people in Chungan district were also restless. The Tsingy army had grown too much in a short period of time. Everyone was like a mouth, but they couldn't take out enough food to feed everyone. They could only plunder and clean up everywhere. However, the amount of food obtained through this method was limited. Many people still couldn't fill their stomachs. There were people in the Tsingy army, but no one could manage such a big family business. They were short-sighted and did not know how to manage it. To put it bluntly, they were a group of bandits with no discipline or morals. Even though they were more powerful than the Red Lotus group in the beginning, after a winter of anxiety, the Tsingy army's power became smaller and smaller. On the contrary, the Red Lotus group was like the sun in the sky. Its territory expanded step by step, further reducing the living space of the Tsingy army. Now Chungan district was desolate. The people shut their doors and did not go out. There were few people on the streets. No one dared to expose their rations. The merchants who could escape had already done so. Those who could not escape had been plundered by the Tsingy army. Half a lifetime's worth of savings had been forcibly taken away. Those who were lucky could still keep their lives. Those who were unlucky died on the spot. Now the people were full of complaints, secretly mocking the Tsingy army should be renamed as a bandit army. Last autumn, because of the earthquake in Shangjing, there was very little grain production. Moreover, the Tsingy army was causing trouble everywhere. This caused the farmers in Chungan district to lose their annual harvest. After the beginning of spring, there were no good seeds to sow, and the grain stored at home was robbed by the Tsingy army. Many people could not stand the hunger and the tyranny of the Tsingy army. They were afraid of losing their lives, so those who could escape escaped. The old, weak, sick, and disabled who couldn't escape stayed behind, relying on the food they carefully stored to survive day after day. Some people were even afraid that the smoke from cooking rice would attract the Tsingy army, so they only dared to soak the rice in water and then eat it. Last winter, countless people froze to death. Now there were people starving to death in Chungan district every day. The district headquarters had already been occupied by the Tsingy army. As one of their main camps, it still maintained its luxurious decorations. The common people outside did not have warm clothes, did not have enough to eat, so they froze to death or starved to death. The leaders of the Tsingy army, on the other hand, were enjoying themselves, eating meat and drinking wine. However, they were not in the mood to enjoy such an extravagant life, because there was not enough food in Chungan district. If the food shortage continued, not only would the people below starve, but they would also have to endure the taste of hunger. Damn it, didn't they say there was a batch of rations? Looking at the time, even if he crawled, he should be here by now. Why isn't he here yet? After half a year, many of the valiant leaders had grown fat, and this one was no exception. His fingers were full of fat, and his knuckles were round and round, looking like short fat sausages. His originally bronze-colored skin had also become a bit whiter. Could it be a problem on the road? The members of the Tsingy army, who were in the district headquarters, were at least at the level of a small chieftain. Their faces were all flushed red. Looking at their faces, one could tell that they had lived comfortably in the past. After all, the Red Lotus group's evildoers are very strange. The fat general pondered for a while and said, "How about this? Send someone out to investigate." This batch of rations was exceptionally important to the Tsingy army in Chungan district. If they did not have enough rations, they did not know what the Tsingy army would do. By then even they would not be able to suppress them. Thinking of this, The fat general furrowed his brows fiercely. The small leader received the order and left. Another shifty-eyed small leader took the opportunity to suggest. General, didn't everyone say that the neighboring Xiangyang district is overflowing with wealth? If there's really no rations, we can attack them and occupy that piece of land. Do we still have to worry about not having enough rations? When the small leader said this, the spy's words surfaced in his mind. According to the spy's description, Xiangyang district was a place comparable to the heavenly court. It was clean and tidy, and the houses were all new. It was so beautiful that it did not seem like it belonged to the human world. It was more like it fell from the sky. Every citizen was dressed like a noble, and no one had starved or frozen to death. At that time, the small leader scoffed at the words. How could there be such a good place in the world? However, now Qingan district was facing the predicament of running out of ammunition and rations. The promised rations had yet to arrive. This made him anxious. He originally thought that this suggestion would be rewarded. At the very least, it would be able to divert the general's attention, who knew that he would be scolded instead. If Xiangyang district was easy to conquer, I would have done so long ago. Do I need your hindsight? The general said angrily. The fat on his face jiggled, and his eyes were almost squeezed out by the fat. Not long after, a messenger suddenly rushed in from outside. He knelt on the ground and panted. Bad. Bad news. What's bad news? The general's heart tightened. The messenger caught his breath and said heavily, the rations were robbed. What? The small leaders in the hall were shocked. The general directly stood up and grabbed the messenger's collar with one hand. He lifted him up and said furiously, say it again. What was robbed? Which bastard dared to rob my rations? The messenger said with difficulty. It was the cook who transported the rations. They escaped and said that there was an ambush. They didn't see who the enemy was. The general's face was ashen. The fat on his face trembled with his heavy breathing. That's too much. He casually threw the messenger out. Those good-for-nothings who transported the rations didn't even see who the enemy was. The general was about to say that the cook who transported the rations should be killed to avoid wasting rations. Just as the words reached his throat, another sound came from outside. Report. The general took a deep breath and asked, what's the matter now? There are thousands of troops surrounding the city. What? Everyone's faces were already ashen to the point where they couldn't look anymore. The rations were robbed, and then the enemy came knocking on their door. It was like when it rains, it pours. They were out of luck. Is it the demons from the Red Lotus group again? The messenger said. No, the flag on it says Lu. They've already started challenging us. Lu, which family is this? Jiang Pingji indicated that she was not willing to challenge them. They were already at the city gate. Wouldn't it be better to just start fighting? What if they don't come out? Jiang Pingji turned her head and asked Wei Ci. Don't you think this is very childish? They had to have a war of words with the enemy before they started fighting. They would curse their parents, and it would be like children playing house. Wei Ci's face was cold. He said, this concerns morale. My lord, please don't joke. Jiang Pingji responded with an "oh." She behaved herself for a while. She made things difficult for Wei Ci again. She held back her laughter and asked, but some of the soldiers can only speak in the local dialect. They can't speak in the official language, and they don't understand the dialects of other places. If the people challenging us don't speak the same language, wouldn't it be like chickens talking to ducks? Wei Ci was speechless. Su Ku, who had already pacified the logistics and ordered all kinds of siege equipment to be in place, rode over on horseback. When he heard this tricky question, he almost fell off his horse. She could not make things difficult for Wei Zixiao. Even if she asked Master Yuan Jing, the old man might not be able to answer. Jiang Pingji muttered to herself. Do both sides have to communicate beforehand and send an interpreter who is proficient in dialects? Chapter 504. Xiaozai Waipabai. To be honest, I really don't understand the thinking of the ancient people. Why did they inform you before the war? You have to be careful. I'm bringing people to fight you. I'll give you time to prepare. Come out and fight it out. Jiang Pingji saw the bullet screen and secretly nodded. She had the same idea. Why did they have to challenge them outside the city? They could just give the order to attack. They had enough siege equipment. It would not be a problem to break through the walls of Anqing district. If Wei Xi knew what she was thinking, he would probably sigh again. Jintian Jieji. To be honest, I don't understand either. But it is reasonable to exist. It should be in line with the national conditions at that time, right? For example, the Western Knights here have a dual format, where two parties of the same type fight each other. Infantry against infantry, cavalry against cavalry, artillery against artillery. There won't be artillery bombardment of cavalry, or cavalry crushing infantry. They will even greet each other politely before the battle. Klian Sisi. To the person above, you're talking about the Battle of Generals, right? It's like the Battle of Generals in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Now they're challenging each other. It feels different. In comparison, I think it's more normal to challenge each other. The Battle of Generals is too Chinibyu. Jiang Pingji could still find time to look at the bullet screen on the battlefield. She secretly raised her eyebrows when she saw the comment. Her opinion was the opposite of the audience's. It was stupid to challenge each other. On the contrary, the Battle of Generals was quite interesting. If it was a battle of generals, she could at least relax. She didn't have to sit in the middle army like a fool. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Kukuwopopeo. TSK, I think the Battle of Generals is super exciting. I used to watch the old version of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Every time I saw generals riding their horses and fighting to the death in front of the two armies, I felt that it was special. The three heroes fought Lu Bu, Wen Jiu beheaded Hua Xiong, and so on. Xiangshan Hua Manlu. In ancient times, there was a battle of generals, also known as a teacher. A teacher is a challenge. I agree with what the previous friend said. It is reasonable to exist. In ancient times, where the population was sparse, survival was difficult and lifespans were short, overly violent methods of war would only cause more casualties. Often, the outcome of the Battle of Generals could greatly affect morale. It could even be the key to victory. What was morale? In Jiang Pingji's era, the most important factor in war was technology. The second was tactical layout, and weapons were the key to victory. The influence of individual heroism on the outcome of a war was almost negligible. However, in this era where information was outdated, while equipment was still important, morale seemed to be even more important. If morale was too low, the soldiers would not be in the mood to fight. They would even flee at the sight of the enemy. The enemy didn't even need to fight. They could just go and capture the captives. For the weaker side, if they won the Battle of Generals, it would stimulate the morale of the soldiers behind them, and they might even be able to defeat the strong. One person chased after 10 people and didn't even pant. Su Ku, who was at the side, did not know whether to laugh or feel sorry for Wei Xi. Why did he have to meet such a crafty lord? The rules of the battlefield have always been like this. Su Ku smiled and helped Wei Xi out of the predicament. He said, "Everyone knows that when you challenge someone to a fight, you will not say anything nice. Even if you curse in a dialect that the other party does not understand, it does not matter, as long as you know that it is a provocative curse." Jiang Pingji felt a little guilty from Wei Xi's gaze, as if she had done something to the little princess. Now that Su Ku was trying to give her a way out, she went along with it. She changed the topic in a stiff tone, pretending to be concerned about the battle. Looking at the watchtower, he said, "What should we do if no one comes out?" Wei Xi said, "Continue shouting." If the side that was challenged did not fight for a long time, it would be regarded as a coward, which would also affect the morale of both sides. Wei Xi only wanted to increase the morale of his own side and suppress the morale of the enemy. It was not important whether the other party came out to fight or not. If they did not come out to fight, continue shouting and attack when the time was right. If they came out to fight, it would be better. The martial arts of their own generals were not just for show. The morale of the other party would collapse faster. The B** start upstairs. If you have the guts, come down and fight with me. Could it be that all of you have been cleansed and become a coward without a bird? If you know what's good for you, Quickly come down and kneel down to welcome us into the city. We can still let you die a quick death." It was obvious that a battle was approaching, but the scene of the confrontation at the top and bottom of the city was too funny. The atmosphere in the streaming room was quite relaxed. The soldiers who were cursing below were not tired of it. They could not wait to spread their voices throughout the entire Chungan district. The members of the Tsingy army on the watchtower looked panicked and afraid. They were so stunned that they could not even retort. The more it was like this, the greater the difference in morale between both sides. At that moment, Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes and suddenly said, "Someone's coming." Not long after, an unusually plump and strong man appeared on the battlement of the city wall. He was bare-chested like the Maitreya Buddha, exposing his chest, buttocks, and breasts. As soon as he came up, he cursed exasperatedly, "Son of a b*****, downstairs. Your grandfather is here." Li Yun squinted his eyes, brandished his spear, and urged his horse forward. "My lord, please allow me to fight with the villain. I will definitely take the head of the enemy." Jiang Pingji glanced at Li Yun with hidden bitterness. He had already volunteered to fight. How could she snatch the head of her subordinate? Was she that kind of lord? "Go. I wish you a triumphant return," Jiang Pingji said seemingly magnanimously, but there was a hint of reluctance in her eyes. Li Yun was a simple-minded child. How could he understand all this? He did not understand, but Wei Ci did. Li Yun would definitely be put in a difficult position when he returned. Creak, the city gate of Chungan district opened a crack. 3 leaders came out on horseback. Behind them were hundreds of members of the Tsingy army. When everyone saw the appearance of the leader, they almost burst out laughing. "Songsunyuanya. What the f***ck? Did you see that poor horse? Its hooves are trembling, right? Pia Pia Wiang. The best of the match, the most pitiful horse in history." Looking from afar, the leader of the Tsingy army was holding a huge axe in his right hand. Although his clothes were gathered up, because his body was too fat, it looked like it was tightly attached to his body. His width alone was equivalent to that of 3 normal men. He sat alone on the horse's back. His buttocks occupied half of the horse's body, and his fat flesh collapsed. The horse he was riding was also overweight. It did not have the vigorous posture that a fine horse should have, and its 4 hooves were trembling. How is this a battle? This must be a comedy, right? Kneeling for you, Ebiao. I say, my horse is amazing. It's so fat, but it can still carry its owner who weighs a small mountain. Bukianlio. I guess it's more than 280 caddies, including the axe in his hand. It should be close to 400. What a hard-working horse. The fat general of the Tsingy army raised his big axe and said to Li Yun, who had come out on horseback, "Grandson, your grandfather is here." Li Yun snorted coldly. The horse he was riding seemed to have sensed it and snorted. At that moment, the members of the Tsingy army on the city wall suddenly shouted, "General Tsongtian is mighty. General Tsongtian will win." Li Yun's hearing was superb. He almost pulled a long face when he heard that. Was the Tsingy army invited by a fool? Jiang Pingji resisted the urge to smile. She coughed softly and waved her hand. "Beat the drums. You ignorant brat, give me your life." General Tsongtian shouted. The fat horse he was riding suddenly broke out at a speed that did not match its size. Chapter 505. Clang. With a loud noise, the silver spear made a feint, leaving a silvery shadow in the air. It forced the huge axe to deviate from its direction, and used this to offset most of the force. Even so, Li Yun still felt numb between his thumb and forefinger. He was secretly shocked by this man's arm strength. If it were not for his solid basic skills and excellent spear technique, the long spear might have been knocked out of his hand. At that time, General Tsongtian would take advantage of his victory and attack him with his sword. By then, Li Yun's life would be in danger. Not only was Li Yun shocked, but the expression of the fat man, who called himself General Tsongtian, also changed. He had never expected that his time-tested move would fail to succeed. In the past, those fools always took the fat man lightly and thought that he did not have much ability. When they really fought, they would either be chopped to death by General Tsongtian's axe, or their weapons would be knocked out of their hands. Then, they would be beheaded because they could not escape in time. Li Yin's specialty was not strength but speed. No matter how strong General Songtian was, it was useless if he could not hit someone. Every time Li Yin deflected the force, it felt like a fist punching cotton. It was extremely uncomfortable. Li Yin's attack speed was extremely fast. Even a conceited person like General Songtian did not dare to take it lightly. This was because Li Yin was very good at restraining those who used strength to break tricks. Unfortunately, General Songtian was one of them. Li Yin slightly narrowed his phoenix eyes. After a few tentative attacks, he soon found out General Songtian's weakness. It was true that General Songtian was very strong, and his huge body gave people a strong visual impression. But he also had two fatal points. One was his reaction speed. In Li Yin's view, General Songtian was as slow as a tortoise. The second was his endurance. Just now, General Songtian had used all his strength when they met face to face. After missing a move, General Songtian's breathing began to become heavier. As the two fought, General Songtian gradually became anxious, fearing that he would lose to a fair-skinned beardless boy. Soon, an idea flashed through his mind. He suddenly opened his mouth, and his voice was like thunder. "Pretty boy, hand over your life to your grandpa." General Songtian was flustered when he saw that Li Yin was fighting with ease and dexterity like a loach. After fighting for more than 30 rounds, Li Yin was still calm and breathing steadily. His hand that was holding the silver spear did not tremble at all. Obviously, Li Yin was looking for an opportunity to kill him. He shouted loudly, trying to use his voice to disturb Li Yin. At the same time, he found an escape route for himself. Sweat the size of beans appeared on his fat face. Very quickly, the sweat flowed down his thick chin and wet the front of his shirt. The look in Li Yin's eyes changed. He pretended to be shocked and was stunned for a moment. General Songtian was delighted to see this and quickly seized the opportunity. "Die!" There was another angry roar. Li Yin's face turned paler, and his spear was no longer as agile and swift as before. The viewers in the live stream nervously looked at the two people standing together in front of the formation. The bullet screen in the live stream gradually decreased. Obviously, their attention was attracted by the battle, and they were not in the mood to send bullet screens. However, following General Songtian's roar, the bullet screen exploded. "Luoluo peanut candy. F***CK, that's too shameless." That loud voice almost scared me to the point that I lost my phone. Han Mei is so close to him, and I'm worried about his ears. If he's scared by accident, he might lose his life. Xiwa Hai Liuxiang. How should I put it? Although the Battle of Generals is a one-on-one challenge, it involves a fight of life and death after all. Apart from not allowing a second person to intervene, any means are allowed. For example, shouting to disturb the opponent is not considered shameless. Chiuebo. Although it's allowed, Brother Han Mei is concentrating on the battle. If he suddenly shouted like that, wouldn't a timid person be scared out of his wits? Think about it. When you are concentrating on doing your homework or listening to a lecture, a guy roars in your ear. His voice is comparable to heavenly thunder. I think not only will he be scared out of his wits, but he will also probably go deaf. The plane is late. My heart aches for Brother Han Mei. Streamer, accept the gift. Remember not to starve my husband. Ciao. My heart aches for him too. Besides, that's my husband with unparalleled waist strength. How can he be a mistress? Because of the system's little tricks, the user will be kicked out of the streaming room, and his IP address will be blocked as soon as the national forces or influential organizations of that dimension appear on the bullet screen. Therefore, most of the audience in the streaming room are onlookers. It's easy for them to deviate from the topic. Unparalleled waist strength. Thinking about it carefully, it's a bit dirty. After a while, the spectators realized that something was wrong. Is Brother Han Mei going to be defeated? It seems that since General Songtian's trick, Brother Han Mei has slowly fallen into a disadvantageous position. Han Mei's husband. Damn it. How can my Brother Han Mei lose? Biao. Come on, Brother Han Mei. Get up and defeat that fat man. Catch him and light him up as a sky lantern. Shinda's easy. No, I'm too nervous. Brother Han Mei can't lose his first battle. Jiang Pingji looked calm. Wei Xiai smiled. Only Su Ku, who was unaware of the situation, was so anxious that he gripped the reins tightly, fearing that Li Yin would be defeated. On the battlefield, the sound of drums was like thunder. The banners were fluttering, and the strong wind was blowing. Li Yin gradually showed signs of defeat. In the last blow, the silver spear in his hand was almost knocked out of his hand. Jiang Pingji suddenly said, "Soon." Li Yin was no match for General Tsangtian. He could only clench his teeth and turn around to escape. He got off the warhorse and ran very fast. General Tsangtian laughed and chased after him. He raised his axe high and was about to chop it down. Just at that moment, the door in front of General Tsangtian was wide open, and there were flaws everywhere. A good chance. Li Yun, who had already patted his horse to escape, had a sharp look on his face. He pulled the reins with his left hand abruptly, and the horse he got off turned around. Li Yun, who was supposed to escape, did not. The weak momentum of his spear was stronger than when he was at his peak. It seemed that the frequent predicament he was in just now was just an illusion of General Tsangtian. Shocked, he wanted to withdraw his weapon to resist, but a dazzling silver light had already struck him like a thunderbolt. Poof! The sound of the spearhead piercing into flesh was heard. The silver light had already sunk into General Tsangtian's body. Li Yin bent his waist handsomely on the back of his horse and sidestepped General Tsangtian's inertia. He went around to General Tsangtian's back, raised his hand, and grabbed the silver spear that had penetrated General Tsangtian's body. Then he pulled it out forcefully. Beautiful! A trace of admiration flashed across Jiang Pingji's eyes. Li Yin had beheaded General Tsangtian. Then he grabbed the head and spurred his horse back to the battlefield. My lord, fortunately I didn't disappoint you. Li Yun's face was still a little flushed, and his breathing was only slightly rapid. He did not look like the miserable state he had been in just now. The audience, who had been so scared that they did not dare to breathe, and had prepared themselves for Han Mei's death, opened their mouths wide in astonishment. There was a gap of a few seconds in the bullet screen, until they came to their senses. Only then did they start to send bullet screens at a high speed to express their surprise. Xianggu has returned home. What a beautiful sudden thrust. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.